I stood over my wife's grave, ready to say my final goodbye. But the person in that casket wasn't my Serafina. I know this because a message lit up my phone, a message sent from beyond the grave. It had only two instructions. Believe I am alive and trust no one, especially not our children. Before I tell you how I uncovered a conspiracy buried deeper than any coffin, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that true love can find a way to speak even after death. My name is Silas Jefferson. I am 75 years old, and my world had been reduced to the 6 feet of upturned Georgia soil in front of me. 50 years. That's how long Serafina and I had been one person. We were married in a small Atlanta church on a sweltering August day, and I remember thinking then that her smile was brighter than the sun. Now the sun felt cold on my skin. The preacher's words were a low, meaningless drone like the buzzing of a distant fly. He spoke of God's plan of peace, of a better place. But all I could think about was the empty space in our bed, the second coffee cup I would never again fill in the morning, the silence that now owned our home. My heart felt like a hollowed-out piece of wood, brittle and empty. I looked at my children. My son Marcus stood tall and imposing in his tailored suit. He was 50 years old, a man who measured the world in profit and loss. During the preacher's eulogy, I saw him subtly check the time on his gold watch. He looked less like a grieving son and more like a man waiting for a delayed flight. His face was a mask of solemnity, but his eyes were restless, scanning the small crowd as if calculating the net worth of the attendees. When it was his turn to speak, his voice was smooth, practiced. He spoke of our mother's legacy, of the assets she had built, of the importance of protecting what she had created. It sounded less like a tribute and more like a corporate mission statement. He never once mentioned the sound of her laugh or the way she would hum when she tended to her garden. He spoke of Serafina, the institution, not Sarah, the woman. My daughter Naomi stood beside her husband David. Her grief was louder than Marcus's, punctuated by loud theatrical sobs that seemed to shudder through her entire body. But I watched her hands. She clutched a lace handkerchief, dabbing at eyes that remained curiously dry. Her sorrow felt like a performance, a role she was playing for an audience. Her husband David was a picture of supportive concern. He was a real estate developer, a man with a smile as smooth and polished as the marble countertops he installed in his new constructions. He had an arm wrapped around Naomi, but his gaze was distant. His eyes weren't on the casket. They were drifting over the rolling green hills of the cemetery, lingering on the ancient oak trees that bordered the property. I had seen that look on his face before during business meetings. It was the look of a man appraising land, seeing not beauty or history, but acreage and opportunity. He saw a plot of land, not the final resting place of the woman who had welcomed him into our family. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and damp earth. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the canopy above, and for a moment I closed my eyes and imagined it was Sarah's hand on my cheek. A tear finally escaped, tracing a hot path down my weathered skin. It was in that moment of pure, unadulterated grief that I felt it, a vibration in the pocket of my coat. It was a jarring intrusion, a tremor from the modern world in a moment that felt ancient and sacred. I almost ignored it. Who would be calling or texting me now? Every person who mattered was standing right here, cloaked in their various shades of black and gray. But the buzzing persisted, a quiet, insistent demand. With trembling fingers, I pulled the old smartphone from my pocket. It was a model Serafina had bought for me a few years ago, insisting I join the rest of the world. The screen was bright against the overcast sky. An unknown number. My first thought was that it was a mistake, a wrong number from a telemarketer who had no respect for the dead. I was about to turn it off when the message preview flashed on the screen. The words were so shocking, so utterly impossible that my mind refused to process them at first. I'm alive. I'm not in the coffin. My breath caught in my throat. My heart, which I thought had shattered just days ago, began to pound against my ribs with a frantic, painful rhythm. This had to be a prank, a cruel, sick joke played by some heartless teenager. Who would do such a thing? I looked around, my eyes darting from face to face. Was someone watching me? Was someone enjoying my torment? My fingers, clumsy with age and shock, fumbled as I tried to type a reply. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and a desperate, illogical hope. Who are you? I typed, my thumb hovering over the send button. It felt like an insane question to ask. Before I could send it, a second message arrived from the same number. The words of this message landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and chilling me to the bone. I can't say. They are watching us. Don't trust the children. Don't trust the children. The words echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. The preacher had stopped talking. The service was ending. People were beginning to move to form a line to offer their condolences, but I was frozen, rooted to the spot. My gaze lifted from the phone and landed on Marcus, who was now discreetly scrolling through something on his own device. I looked at Naomi, who was whispering in David's ear, a faint, inappropriate smile gracing her lips for just a second before she remembered her role and dissolved back into sobs. They are watching us. The world tilted. The solid ground beneath my feet felt like it was shifting. In the span of 30 seconds, my grief had been poisoned. It was now laced with a terrifying cocktail of fear, suspicion, and a sliver of hope so sharp it felt like pain. Was it possible? Could my Sarah, my wife of 50 years, somehow be alive? And if she was, what was in that polished mahogany box? And what, dear God, had my children done? People began to approach me. Old friends, neighbors, distant cousins. They offered hugs and kind words. "She's in a better place, Silas." My deepest sympathies. She was a wonderful woman. I nodded and accepted their comfort, but their voices sounded like they were coming from the other end of a long tunnel. My mind was racing, replaying every moment since Serafina's heart attack. The way Marcus had taken charge of the funeral arrangements with an unnerving efficiency. The way Naomi had seemed more concerned with the wording of the obituary than with her mother's final moments. David's constant questions about the will phrased as gentle, helpful inquiries. Every action, every word that had seemed normal in the fog of grief now looked sinister. Every hug felt cold. Every word of sympathy sounded like a lie. The anonymous text message had not given me answers. It had shattered my reality and replaced it with 1,000 questions. As the mourners began to disperse and the cemetery workers waited respectfully in the distance, I stood alone. I was no longer just a grieving widower. I was a man standing at the edge of a conspiracy with the ghost of his wife whispering a warning in his ear. And the prime suspects were my own flesh and blood. The love and trust I had spent a lifetime building had evaporated in a single terrifying moment. All that was left was a cold, hard mission to find the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. The preacher's voice had become a gentle murmur in the background of my thoughts. I was no longer standing in the damp Georgia soil beside a freshly dug grave. I was 25 years old again, standing on the empty plot of land that would one day become our home. I remembered the feel of Serafina's hand in mine, her eyes bright with a future only she could see so clearly. She had pointed to a spot beneath a young oak tree. "That's where our kitchen window will be. Silas," she had said, her voice full of certainty, "so I can watch the birds while I drink my morning coffee." I had built that house for her with my own 2 hands, every nail and every board a testament to my love. We had filled it with 50 years of life, of laughter, of arguments and apologies, of children and then grandchildren. And now all I could hear was the hollow echo of a home that had lost its heart. A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped my eye and traced a path through the weathered lines on my face. It was a tear for the girl beneath the oak tree, for the woman who had filled my life with color. It was in that quiet moment of perfect, painful remembrance that the world intruded. A vibration, a low, insistent buzz from the inside pocket of my suit coat. It was a jarring, profane sensation that ripped me from the memory and threw me back into the cold, gray present. My first feeling was a flash of irritation. Who would dare? Who would be so thoughtless as to call or text me now at this most sacred and final of moments? My mind immediately assumed it was a mistake. A robocall about my car's extended warranty, a political survey, the meaningless noise of a world that didn't stop, not even for death. I was determined to ignore it, to let it buzz itself into silence. But it buzzed again, a persistent, deliberate tremor against my heart. It felt less like a notification and more like a tapping on my shoulder from an unseen hand. With a sigh of weary frustration, I reached into my pocket. My fingers felt thick and clumsy as I pulled out the smartphone Serafina had insisted I carry. Its screen flared to life, an unnaturally bright rectangle against the overcast sky. I squinted at it, my eyes still blurry with unshed tears. An unknown number. Just as I was about to dismiss the notification and silence the phone, the first few words of the message preview appeared on the screen. The letters seemed to swim before my eyes, nonsensical and absurd. My mind, steeped in grief, refused to assemble them into a coherent thought. I had to read them 3 times before the meaning began to seep through the fog. I'm alive. I'm not in the coffin. The air rushed out of my lungs in a silent gasp. A tremor went through my entire body, starting in my hands and radiating outward. It felt as if an icy hand had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart, stopping it cold before letting it restart with a painful, frantic pounding. It couldn't be real. My mind screamed at me. It's a prank, a sick, twisted joke, some monstrous teenager getting a laugh at an old man's expense. My knuckles turned white as my grip tightened on the phone, the plastic creaking under the pressure. I scanned the small crowd of mourners, my eyes wild and searching. Was someone watching me? Was there a cruel, smiling face hidden amongst the sad ones? But I saw nothing. Only the bowed heads and somber expressions of friends and family. My fingers, now shaking uncontrollably, moved over the screen. I had to respond. I had to challenge this phantom, this cruel tormentor. My mind was a battlefield. A small, insane spark of hope had been lit in the darkest corner of my soul. A hope so terrifying and impossible that every rational part of me tried to stamp it out. To even consider it for a second felt like a betrayal of my own grief, a madness I couldn't afford. But the spark flickered, refusing to die. What if my thumb hovered over the letters, clumsy and uncertain? Who are you? I managed to type out the words, looking alien on the screen. It was the question of a man losing his grip on reality. I stared at the question, my finger poised over the send button, but I never had the chance to send it. A second message from the same unknown number lit up the screen, appearing directly below the first. This message was not a shocking proclamation. It was a cold, sharp command, and it landed with the force of a physical blow. I can't say. They are watching us. Don't trust the children. Don't trust the children. The words were a key unlocking a door in my mind I never knew existed. Suddenly, the vague unease I had felt all morning crystallized into a single, horrifying image. My gaze lifted from the phone slowly, as if my head weighed 1,000 pounds. I looked at my son Marcus. He was no longer looking at his watch. He was now scrolling through his phone, his expression one of intense concentration, completely disengaged from the solemnity of the moment. My eyes moved to my daughter Naomi. She was whispering something to her husband David. And just for a fleeting second, I saw it. A ghost of a smile on her lips, quickly hidden as she remembered to bring the handkerchief back to her face. They are watching us. The pieces slammed together in my mind with a deafening crash. Their forced tears. Their cold hugs. Marcus's eulogy that sounded like a shareholder report. David's eyes calculating the value of the land. It wasn't just disrespect. It wasn't just a modern detachment from tradition. It was something else. Something calculated, something sinister. The anonymous messages were the lens that brought it all into focus. The world began to spin. The preacher's voice, the quiet weeping of a cousin, the chirping of a distant bird, it all faded into a dull roar. The only thing I could hear were the words from the screen echoing over and over in the sudden, terrifying silence of my soul. I'm alive. Don't trust the children. My grief, which had been a vast, deep ocean of sorrow, was now a raging tsunami, pulling me under with waves of confusion, fear, and a terrifying, burgeoning anger. My entire life, my entire understanding of my family had been built on a foundation of love and trust. And in the space of a minute, that foundation had been dynamited, leaving me standing on the edge of a chasm. I was no longer sure of anything. Was my wife dead or alive? Were my children grieving sons or something else entirely? The only thing I knew for certain as I slipped the phone back into my pocket with a hand that was now eerily steady was that the funeral was over, and my war had just begun. The world around me seemed to recede, the colors fading to a dull gray. The preacher had finished his final prayer. People were beginning to move, their quiet shuffling and soft sobs forming a gentle, mournful chorus. But I heard none of it. I was trapped in the ringing silence of my own mind, the words from the phone echoing in the void. Don't trust the children. The command was absolute, a new and terrible commandment handed down from an unknown God. My gaze, which had been turned inward, slowly lifted. I looked at my children, truly looked at them for the first time since reading the message. It was as if a veil had been torn from my eyes, and I was seeing not the son and daughter I had raised, but two strangers wearing their faces. The lifetime of love I held for them, a foundation I thought was made of solid granite, suddenly felt like sand crumbling beneath my feet. My mind began to rewind, replaying the last few days, the last few months, with a horrifying new clarity. Marcus. I remembered a conversation just before Sarah's final decline. He had sat in my study, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand, talking about the burdens of homeownership. He'd called this house our home, a depreciating asset with excessive overhead. At the time, I'd dismissed it as Marcus being Marcus, always seeing the world through a spreadsheet. Now I saw it for what it was. He wasn't offering financial advice. He was circling. He was testing the waters, gauging my attachment, planting the seeds for a future sale. His eulogy hadn't just been cold. It had been a prospectus. He was mourning the loss not of a mother but of a primary shareholder in his future inheritance. And Naomi, my sweet Naomi. I saw her now not as my little girl, but as a woman whose tears were a tool. I remembered the endless phone calls, the whispered complaints about bills, the small loans to cover a car repair, or a vacation that David insisted they deserved. Sarah had always been the soft touch, always willing to help, always believing the best. "They're just finding their feet, Silas," she would say. But they were in their late 40s. Their feet were firmly planted in our pockets. Her sobs today, once a sound that would have torn my heart out, now seemed hollow and rehearsed. They were the sounds of a performer, not a daughter. A daughter whose grief was a mask for a different, more selfish emotion. Was it relief in David, the snake in our garden? He was the architect of this. I could see his influence now, a subtle poison that had seeped into our family over the years. The constant casual remarks about the neighborhood's changing demographics. The jokes about how much a developer would pay for a double lot like ours. They weren't jokes, they were assessments. He had looked at our family and seen a business opportunity. He had looked at Serafina's love and my trust as liabilities to be managed until they could be liquidated. An old friend, Joseph, came up to me and clasped my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Silas," he said, his eyes filled with genuine sorrow. She was one of a kind. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I felt like a fraud. Joseph was comforting a man who was grieving the simple loss of his wife. He wasn't comforting the man who now suspected his wife had been the victim of a conspiracy, a man whose children might be monsters. I was living in a different reality from everyone else here, isolated by a secret I couldn't possibly share. My mind flashed back to a memory so pure and cherished it now felt like a wound. Naomi, age 6, her face bright with triumph as she finally balanced on her bicycle without training wheels, shouting, "Look at me, Daddy, I'm flying." I had been so proud. Where did that little girl go? When did her innocent joy curdle into this cold, calculating greed? I thought of Marcus as a teenager working tirelessly in my workshop to build a bookshelf for his mother's birthday. The pride on his face when he presented it to her was a memory I had held on to for decades. Was that a lie too? Was every memory, every hug, every "I love you" now suspect? The image of a loving family I had carried in my heart for 50 years was shattering into a million pieces. It was a beautiful portrait that upon closer inspection was crawling with termites eaten away from the inside. The love was real, my love for them, Sarah's love for them. But it had not been returned in kind. It had been accepted, consumed, and treated as a resource. As the last of the mourners offered their sympathies and began to drift away toward their cars, I was left standing with them, my children, and their predator husband. They approached me, their faces once again arranged into masks of concern. "Dad, let's get you home," Marcus said, his voice gentle. "You need to rest." I looked into his eyes, searching for a flicker of the boy I once knew. I found nothing but a cool, assessing gaze. He was looking at me, but he was seeing a problem to be managed, an obstacle between him and his inheritance. The grief was still there, a great gaping hole in my soul where Serafina used to be. But something else was taking root in that empty space. It was a cold, hard resolve. I would not crumble. I would not be managed. I would not be a victim. I would play the part of the grieving, confused old man they expected me to be, and I would uncover the truth. I made a silent promise not to the empty casket, but to the memory of the girl beneath the oak tree. "I will fight for us, Sarah." The war had been declared without my knowledge, but I would be the one to finish it. The day after the funeral, the silence in our home was a physical presence. It was a thick, heavy blanket that smothered every sound. For 50 years, this house had been filled with the music of Serafina's life, her humming in the kitchen, the sound of her laughter echoing down the hall, the quiet rustle of pages as she read in her favorite armchair. Now the only sound was the mournful ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer, each tick a reminder of a second she was no longer in. I walked through the rooms, my hand trailing along the furniture she had chosen, my fingers brushing against the photographs on the mantelpiece. Every object was a memory, every memory a fresh wound. The grief was still a raw, open thing, but now it was accompanied by something else, a cold, watchful suspicion that coiled in the pit of my stomach. The words from the text message were burned into my mind. Don't trust the children. The doorbell chimed a harsh, unwelcome sound that shattered the quiet. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Marcus, Naomi, and David stood on the porch, a somber-looking trio. Naomi held a casserole dish, the universal symbol of feigned concern. Marcus was already looking at his phone, his thumb swiping through emails. And David, my son-in-law, stood slightly in front of them, a leather briefcase in his hand and a look of practiced sympathy on his face. He was the designated spokesman. He always was. "Dad," he said, his voice soft and oozing with compassion. "How are you holding up?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, placing a hand on my shoulder. It felt less like a gesture of comfort and more like an act of possession. Naomi followed, placing the casserole on the kitchen counter. "I made your favorite, Daddy. Thought you might not feel up to cooking." Marcus was the last to enter, pocketing his phone with a sigh that suggested he was making a great sacrifice to be here. "We know it soon," David began, steering me toward the living room. "Believe me, the last thing we want to do is burden you. But there are certain practical matters we need to address for the estate. Formalities, really. It's better to get them out of the way now." I sat in my armchair, the one opposite Sarah's, and watched them. It was like seeing them for the first time. I saw the impatience behind Marcus's solemn expression. I saw the greed flickering in Naomi's eyes as she glanced at her mother's porcelain collection. And I saw the cold, hard calculation in David's gaze as he surveyed the room. He wasn't seeing a family home filled with memories. He was seeing square footage, hardwood floors, and crown molding. He was seeing a property. His eyes lingered on the wide original oak floorboards, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, calculating their resale value. He glanced at the large windows that overlooked the garden, not appreciating the view of Sarah's prize-winning roses, but assessing the natural light as a selling point. I remembered something Sarah had said to me just last year after David had given a long, unsolicited speech about property taxes. She had been quiet for a moment, then said, "That boy doesn't see a home, Silas. He sees a portfolio, never forget that." At the time, I thought she was being too harsh. Now her words felt like a prophecy. To properly handle the insurance and the probate process, David continued, his voice smooth and reasonable as he opened his briefcase. "We need to get an official appraisal of the house and its contents. It's a standard procedure to establish the value of the estate. It protects everyone involved." He made it sound so logical, so responsible. He was wrapping his greed in the language of prudence. Marcus chimed in, leaning forward with an air of authority. "He's right, Dad. For tax purposes, we need a baseline valuation as of the date of death. It's critical for establishing the cost basis of the assets. The IRS requires it. We're just trying to be proactive and make sure everything is handled correctly so you don't have to worry about it later." He used financial jargon like a weapon designed to make me feel old, out of touch, and incapable. Naomi put a hand on my arm. "We're just worried about you, Daddy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We can see how much pain you're in. We want to take care of all these stressful things so you can just focus on grieving." Her touch was cold. Her concern was an insult. They weren't trying to lift a burden from my shoulders. They were trying to pry my fingers from what was mine. "I've taken the liberty of asking a colleague to stop by," David said, glancing at his watch. "He's one of the best appraisers in Atlanta, a real professional. It won't take long at all. In fact, that should be him now." As if on cue, the doorbell rang again. The timing was too perfect. This wasn't a spontaneous visit, it was a planned ambush. David walked to the door with a confident stride and opened it to reveal a man in a crisp suit holding a clipboard and a digital camera. "Silas, this is Mr. Henderson," David said, leading the man into the room. "Mr. Henderson, This is my father-in-law, Silas Jefferson." Mr. Henderson gave me a polite professional nod. "My condolences for your loss, sir," he said. He was just a man doing his job, but to me he felt like an intruder, an accomplice to the violation of my home and my grief. He was the tangible proof of their intentions. They hadn't just talked about it, they had acted. They had brought a stranger into this sacred space to put a price tag on the life Serafina and I had built. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken tension. They were all looking at me, waiting. David with his polished smile, Marcus with his look of strained patience, Naomi with her wide pleading eyes. They were a united front, a pack that had cornered its prey, waiting for the final, inevitable surrender. They expected me to be a feeble old man broken by grief, easily led. They expected me to nod, to acquiesce, to sign the papers and let them have their way. They were waiting for the old Silas. But the old Silas was gone. In his place was a man with a warning from his wife, a man whose heart was broken, but whose eyes were wide open. I could feel the cold weight of the phone in my pocket and the even colder weight of the truth in my soul. They thought this was the beginning of their victory. They had no idea it was the beginning of their war. David approached me with the clipboard and a pen, his movement smooth and confident. He held it out to me, the pen positioned perfectly for my signature. It was a gesture he had probably made 1,000 times in his business dealings, a gesture that assumed compliance. The appraiser, Mr. Henderson, stood by the doorway, a respectful but expectant observer. My children flanked him, their faces a carefully composed picture of supportive concern. They had built this moment, choreographed it to make refusal seem not only difficult, but irrational, the act of a grief-stricken old man. They were waiting for me to play my part. I looked at the pen, a simple plastic object that held the weight of a monumental decision. To sign it would be to surrender. It would be an admission that this house was no longer a home, but a property. It would be a betrayal of Serafina and the silent warning she had sent me. The words from the text message scrolled through my mind like a ticker tape of defiance. "Don't trust the children." I let out a slow, deliberate breath and looked up, meeting David's gaze. I shook my head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "No," I said. My voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was quiet, but it was as solid and unmovable as the foundation of the house itself. The polished smile on David's face tightened at the edges. A flicker of annoyance, quick as a snake's tongue, flashed in his eyes before he masked it again. "Dad," he said, his voice still gentle but with a new, harder edge to it. "I know this is difficult, but it's just a formality. It helps us protect you, to protect the estate from any legal complications down the line." "There will be no complications," I said, my voice remaining level. "Because nothing is happening today. Not this." Marcus stepped forward, taking over as if they had rehearsed this. He adopted the tone of a patient teacher explaining a simple concept to a slow student. "Dad, let's be logical. From a financial perspective, from a legal perspective, delaying this is irresponsible. We need a baseline valuation for tax purposes. It's not an emotional decision, it's a practical one. It's what any competent executor of an estate would do." His use of the word competent was a deliberate jab, a subtle insinuation that I was not. The condescension in his tone was a fresh insult, layered on top of the raw grief. Naomi rushed to my side, placing her hand on my arm. It was meant to be a comforting gesture, but her fingers were cold. "Daddy, please," she pleaded, her voice taking on a whining, manipulative edge. "Don't shut us out. We're just trying to help you through this. Mom would have wanted us to take care of you. She wouldn't want you to carry this whole burden by yourself." That was the final straw. The invocation of their mother's name, using her memory as a tool to further their own greedy agenda, ignited a fire in my chest. I looked at the three of them, this council of predators. I straightened up, feeling a strength I hadn't felt in days. "Your mother," I said, my voice now low and laced with a cold fury that silenced them all, "is barely in the ground. Her scent is still on the pillows in our bedroom. Her coffee cup is still on the counter where she left it. This house is not an estate, it is not an asset, it is the home she loved, and it is still filled with her presence. And I will not have a stranger walking through her rooms putting a price tag on our life together while my heart is still breaking." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "You want to talk about what your mother would have wanted. She would have wanted some respect. A concept you all seem to have forgotten." The silence that followed was absolute. I had taken their weapon, their feigned concern for their mother, and turned it against them. It was an accusation they could not defend against, not here, not now. David's face was a mask of controlled rage. He snatched the clipboard back, his movements sharp and angry. Marcus stared at me, his mouth a thin, hard line. For the first time, he looked less like a son and more like a business rival who had just been outmaneuvered. Naomi's face crumpled, but the tears that welled in her eyes were not tears of sorrow. They were the hot, frustrated tears of a spoiled child who had been told no. Fine David bit out, his voice stripped of all its earlier warmth. We'll discuss this when you're feeling more rational. He turned to the appraiser. I'm sorry you had to waste your time, Henderson. He then turned and walked out the door without another word. Marcus followed him, casting one last cold look in my direction. Naomi lingered for a moment, as if she might try one last emotional appeal, but seeing the unyielding expression on my face, she simply turned and hurried after her husband. The sound of the front door closing behind them was a definitive, resounding slam. It was the sound of battle lines being drawn. I stood in the sudden, deafening silence of the living room, my body trembling with the receding adrenaline. I had done it. I had pushed back. I had won the first skirmish. But the victory felt hollow. There was no joy in it, only a profound and weary sadness. I had just declared war on my own children. I sank into my armchair, the exhaustion hitting me like a physical blow. The fight had only just begun, and I was so terribly alone. That night the house felt different. The silence was no longer just the empty silence of grief. It was charged, expectant. It was the silence of a place that held secrets, a place where a battle had been declared. Sleep was an impossibility. My mind was a relentless machine replaying the confrontation, analyzing every word, every look. The warning from the text message had been proven true beyond any doubt. My children were not just acting disrespectfully. They were acting on a plan that Serafina somehow had known about. A new energy began to course through my veins, pushing aside the weariness. I was not just a grieving old man waiting for the end. I was a soldier who had been given his orders. Sarah had left me a map, and I had the first marker, the strange, ornate key. I knew I couldn't just wait for their next move. I had to make my own. I had to find what that key unlocked. I rose from my chair and walked into Serafina's study, her sanctuary. The room was exactly as she had left it. A stack of books on her reading table, a half-finished crossword puzzle on her desk, the faint scent of the jasmine lotion she always used still lingering in the air. I sat in her chair, running my hands over the smooth, worn leather. I closed my eyes, trying to think like she would. Where would she hide something of ultimate importance? Not somewhere obvious, like a safe or a desk drawer. Marcus and David would have torn the place apart looking for those. It had to be somewhere personal, somewhere that meant something only to us. My eyes scanned the room, lingering on the objects that had defined our life together. The collection of old jazz records, the shelf of photo albums, and then my gaze settled on a painting on the far wall. It wasn't a valuable piece of art. It was a simple amateur landscape in a plain wooden frame. To any observer, it was unremarkable. But to me, it was everything. It was a painting of a small, secluded creek in the Blue Ridge Mountains. A place with no name, a place we had found by accident on a Sunday drive decades ago. A place where on a blanket under a canopy of green leaves I had asked Serafina to be my wife. We had never told the children about that spot. It was ours alone. My heart began to beat faster. I walked over to the painting and lifted it carefully from its hook. The wall behind it was bare, covered in the same floral wallpaper as the rest of the room. I ran my hands over the surface, pressing gently. For a moment, nothing. My hope began to fade. Was I just a foolish old man chasing ghosts? Then my fingers found it. A slight indentation, a faint line near the baseboard that was almost invisible to the eye. I pressed harder. With a soft, dry click, a small square section of the wall popped open. My breath hitched. Behind the panel was a small dark alcove carved out between the wall studs. It was a hiding place I had never known existed. Reaching inside, my fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. I pulled it out into the light. It was the key, the small ornate brass key from my dreamlike memory. It was real. I held it in the palm of my hand, its weight a solid grounding presence. This was it. This was the proof. This was confirmation of everything. Sarah had known. She had planned, and she had left me a path to follow. Holding that key, I was no longer alone in the dark. I had a piece of my wife's strength in my hand, a final gift from her brilliant mind, and I knew with absolute certainty what I had to do next. After they were gone, the house seemed to exhale. The tense confrontational energy they had brought with them dissipated, but it was replaced by something else. A silence that was heavier, more profound than simple grief. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first shots have been fired. The lines were drawn. The war was real. I walked through the living room, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I ran a hand over the back of Serafina's armchair, the fabric still holding the faint indentation of where she always sat. The confrontation had drained me, leaving me feeling every one of my 75 years. But beneath the exhaustion, a new unfamiliar energy was beginning to smolder. It was the cold, hard fire of purpose. I was no longer just a victim of circumstance. I was a guardian. I was the sole defender of the life, the love, and the legacy that Serafina and I had built together. Sleep was a luxury I could not afford. As darkness fell outside, painting the windows in shades of deep indigo and black, I knew I couldn't just wait for their next move. Serafina's warning her plan, it all depended on me. She had left me a path, and the first step was to find where it began. The memory of the text message was a constant looping refrain in my mind. But now it was paired with a new image, the small ornate brass key I had found in the hidden compartment behind the magnolia painting in her study. I had held it in my hand, its weight a solid, tangible piece of a puzzle I was just beginning to understand. It was more than a key. It was a testament. A final, secret correspondence from my wife. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this key was the next step. Sarah had left me a map, and this was the first marker on the trail. My search had to begin where her life had been most truly her own. Not in the kitchen, which was a space for the family. Not in the living room, a space for guests. It had to be in her study, her sanctuary. The room was exactly as she had left it. A stack of books on her reading table, a half-finished crossword puzzle on her desk, the faint scent of the jasmine lotion she always used still lingering in the air. I sat in her chair, the worn leather creaking softly, a sound as familiar to me as my own breathing. I ran my hands over the smooth, aged wood of her desk. This was the place she came to think, to read, to be herself. I closed my eyes, trying to clear my mind of the anger and fear, trying to think like she would. Where would she hide something of ultimate importance? My first instinct was to search the obvious places. I gently opened the drawers of her desk. They were filled with the mundane artifacts of her life: stationery pens, old photographs, recipes she had clipped from magazines. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was hidden. I ran my hands along the spines of her favorite books on the shelves, pulling a few out, shaking them gently. Only dust fell from the pages. I looked behind the heavy curtains under the rug inside the porcelain vase on her mantelpiece. Nothing. A part of me began to feel a creeping sense of foolishness. Was I just an old man chasing shadows? Had grief finally untethered me from reality? Maybe the text was a cruel joke after all. But then I looked at the room again, not as a searcher, but as her husband. I saw the objects not as potential hiding places, but as pieces of her soul. She was sentimental, my Sarah, but she was also the most practical, intelligent woman I had ever known. She would know that the first thing greedy hands would do is tear apart the obvious places. The hiding spot had to be more clever, more personal. It had to be somewhere that was meaningful only to us. My eyes scanned the walls, passing over framed photos of the children and grandchildren, and then they landed on a painting. It was not a valuable piece of art. It was a simple amateur landscape in a plain wooden frame. To any other person it would be unremarkable, perhaps even forgettable. But to me it was the most precious object in the room. It was a painting of a small, secluded creek in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place with no name, a place we had found by accident on a Sunday drive nearly 52 years ago. It was the place where, on a checkered blanket under a canopy of green, sun-dappled leaves, I had asked Serafina to be my wife. We had never told the children about that spot. We had never taken them there. It was ours, a sacred piece of our history hidden in plain sight. My heart began to beat with a new hopeful rhythm. I walked over to the painting. My hands, which had been trembling with exhaustion just an hour before, were now steady. I lifted it carefully from its hook. The faded floral wallpaper behind it was empty. For a second, my heart sank. But I remembered the way Sarah's mind worked. She loved puzzles, intricacies, hidden meanings. I ran my fingers lightly over the surface of the wallpaper, feeling for any imperfection. And then I found it. A faint, almost invisible seam near the baseboard, a perfect rectangle that did not match the pattern of the rest of the wall. I pressed my finger against the seam. At first, nothing happened. I pressed harder, directing the pressure to a corner. With a soft, dry click that was deafening in the silent room, a small, square section of the wall popped open, revealing a dark, hollow space behind it. My breath caught in my throat. A secret compartment carved out between the wall studs, a hiding place I had lived alongside for decades and never knew existed. Reaching into the darkness, my fingers shaking once more, brushed against something cold and metallic. I curled my hand around it and slowly drew it out into the light of the desk lamp. It was a key. A single, old-fashioned brass key, ornate and heavy. It was not a key to any door in our house. It was a key to a safe deposit box. I knew it instantly. This was it. This was the tangible proof. This was the first breadcrumb on the trail she had left for me. I sank into her chair, the key clutched in my palm. Its weight was a solid grounding presence in a world that had become flimsy and uncertain. The exhaustion, the fear, the grief, it was all still there. But now it was joined by a powerful, unshakable resolve. This key was a final gift from my wife, a silent message that transcended the grave. It was a confirmation of her love and her foresight. It was a weapon. And as I sat there in the quiet of her room, holding the key to a future she had planned for me, I was no longer just a widower. I was her chosen soldier, and my mission was just beginning. The night was a long, sleepless journey through a landscape of memory and suspicion. I did not dare to close my eyes, afraid of what dreams might come. Instead, I sat in Serafina's study, the small, heavy brass key resting in the palm of my hand. It was my only anchor in a world that had come undone. With every tick of the clock, the reality of my situation settled deeper into my bones. My wife was gone, but she had left a trail. My children were not grieving. They were circling, waiting. And I, a 75-year-old man who thought his only remaining battles were with the aches in his joints, was a soldier in a war he was just beginning to understand. When the first gray light of dawn filtered through the windows, I rose. I moved with a deliberate slowness, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I bypassed the somber, dark suits I had worn for the funeral and the days surrounding it. Instead, I went to the back of my closet and pulled out a suit I hadn't worn in a decade. It was a charcoal gray tweed, the kind I used to wear when I was a practicing architect on my way to present a set of blueprints to a skeptical city council. It was my armor. Putting it on, I felt a shadow of the man I used to be, a man who built things, a man who solved problems. It was a feeling I desperately needed. I didn't eat. The thought of food was impossible. I simply made a cup of black coffee the way Sarah used to like it, and drank it standing in the kitchen, her silent presence all around me. I tucked the key safely into my jacket pocket, its weight a constant reassuring pressure against my side. I told no one where I was going. There was no one left to tell. Driving through the familiar streets of Atlanta felt different. The city I had known my entire life seemed alien, a place filled with hidden meanings and watchful eyes. Every passing car felt like a potential threat. Every stranger on the sidewalk seemed to know my secret. It was a paranoid fantasy, I knew, but the feeling was undeniable. The world was no longer a safe and predictable place. It was a web of secrets, and I was just beginning to pull at the first thread. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. What would I find? A letter, a clue, proof that my wife was truly, impossibly still alive. Or would I find something darker, a truth that would make me wish for the simple, clean pain of grief I had felt just 2 days ago? I drove not to our usual bank, the large modern branch where everyone knew the Jefferson family. Instinct, or perhaps a whisper of Serafina's own cautious planning, guided me to a smaller, older institution on the other side of town. It was a place of quiet dignity, with marble floors and teller cages made of polished brass. It felt like a place that knew how to keep secrets. I walked in, my heart a steady, heavy drum against my ribs. I approached the bank manager's office, a woman with silver hair and intelligent, compassionate eyes. I introduced myself and explained the situation, my voice calm and collected, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. My wife, Serafina Jefferson, passed away a few days ago. I began the words, still tasting like ash in my mouth. I believe she may have had a safe deposit box here. I found this key among her personal effects. I placed the ornate brass key on the polished surface of her desk. The manager, whose nameplate read Mrs. Gable, looked at the key and then at me, her expression softening with a genuine sympathy that was a world away from the hollow performance of my children. "I am very sorry for your loss, Mr. Jefferson," she said quietly. "Let me check our records." The wait, though only a few minutes, felt like an eternity. I sat in the leather chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to control the tremor that threatened to betray my calm exterior. Mrs. Gable returned a small, hopeful smile on her face. "Yes, Mr. Jefferson. We do have a box for Seraphina Jefferson. Box 713, if you'll follow me." She led me from the main floor of the bank to the back, toward a massive circular steel door that looked like it belonged on a submarine. The vault. The air grew cooler as we approached. She spun a large gleaming wheel and the door swung open with a deep resonant groan, revealing a room lined from floor to ceiling with a grid of identical numbered steel doors. The silence in the vault was absolute, a heavy pressurized quiet that made the world outside seem 1,000 miles away. "Here we are," she said, stopping in front of a small door marked 713. "I will need your key, sir." I handed it to her, my palms slick with sweat. She inserted my key into one lock and a second flatter key from her own ring into another. She turned them both in sequence. There was a series of sharp, satisfying clicks, and the small metal door sprang open. "I will leave you to your privacy," Mrs. Gable said, gesturing to a small secluded viewing room just outside the vault. "Please take all the time you need. Just let me know when you are finished." She gave me another compassionate look and then walked away, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. I was alone. Alone with the secret my wife had carried to her grave and perhaps beyond. I reached into the open slot and pulled out a long, heavy metal box. Its coldness seeped through my fingertips. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with the secrets of the past few months of my wife's life. I carried it into the viewing room and placed it on the small wooden table. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing me in with the truth, whatever it might be. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hand resting on the cool, unyielding lid. This was the threshold. On one side of this moment was the life I had known, a life of love and trust, now shattered by doubt. On the other side was a new, unknown reality. Everything could change in the next few seconds. I took a deep, shuddering breath, a prayer on my lips. A prayer to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore, and a prayer to my wife, my Seraphina. I hoped for a miracle, and I braced myself for the truth. With a hand that was now perfectly steady, I lifted the lid. The contents of the box were stark and methodical. On top, a thick, cream-colored envelope. Beneath it, a simple, prepaid burner phone still in its plastic packaging. And under that, a stack of legal documents bound in blue. Wills, trust agreements, and property deeds. My eyes scanned the titles and I felt a jolt. They were all recent, dated within the last 6 months. But my attention was fixed on the envelope. My name was written on the front in Seraphina's elegant, familiar script. Just seeing her handwriting, the graceful curve of the S in Silas, sent a fresh wave of grief through me. For a moment, I could almost smell her, the faint scent of jasmine that always clung to her. My hands, which had been so steady just moments before, began to tremble as I picked it up. The paper felt warm, as if she had just set it down. It was the last thing she had ever touched with the intention of me finding it. With a deep, shuddering breath, I broke the seal. A single folded sheet of paper was inside. I unfolded it and began to read. "My dearest Silas." The letter began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and our children have already begun to show their true colors. I am so sorry, my love. I am so sorry for the pain you are feeling, and I am sorry for the secrets I had to keep. Please forgive me, for this last deception was the only way I knew how to protect you." The words blurred, and a sound escaped my lips, a choked sob that was swallowed by the thick silence of the viewing room. I had to stop and wipe my eyes, forcing myself to focus on the lines of ink. I could hear her voice in every word, a calm, loving whisper from the other side. "The doctors gave me a diagnosis 8 months ago, a cancer in my pancreas, aggressive and untreatable. They told me I had a year at best. I chose not to tell you or the children. I did not want our last months together to be a death watch. I didn't want to see the pity in your eyes, my love. I didn't want to be a patient, a fragile thing to be managed. I wanted to be your wife just as I have always been. I wanted our days to be filled with life, not the shadow of its end. That was a selfish choice, perhaps, but it was mine to make. I wanted to live until I died, not spend my time dying. I leaned forward, my head in my hands, the letter crinkling in my fist. The guilt was a physical blow. Her fatigue, the weight she had lost, the time she had winced in pain and brushed it off as indigestion. I had seen the signs, but I had let her convince me and myself that they were nothing. Because I hadn't been ready to face the truth. I had been a coward. And she had been alone in her knowledge, bearing that terrible burden by herself. I forced myself to read on. As I began to put my affairs in order, I also began to see our family more clearly. It's funny, isn't it, how the clarity of an ending can illuminate truths you've spent a lifetime ignoring. I started to notice things small at first, but they added up. I saw the way Marcus's eyes lit up when he spoke about our portfolio, not our family. He stopped asking how we were feeling and started asking how our investments were performing. He spoke of this house, our home, not as a place of memories, but as an underutilized asset in a transitioning neighborhood. And Naomi, our sweet girl. I saw how David's ambition had become a poison in her soul. The constant stream of money flowing from our accounts to hers, paying for a lifestyle they could not afford and did not deserve. The way she would look at my jewelry, her compliments sounding less like admiration and more like an appraisal. I had always ignored it, Silas. I made excuses for them, because what mother wants to admit she has raised children who see her love as a line of credit. The final terrible truth came to me by accident. I was resting in the bedroom one afternoon when David came over thinking I was asleep. He took a business call in the hallway. He was careless. He spoke in low tones, but the door was ajar, and I heard him. He was talking to a developer, a man whose name I recognized from the newspaper. And he was talking about our house, our land. He called it the cornerstone parcel for a new luxury condominium project. He spoke of tearing it down, of rezoning, of profits that made my head spin. He told the man on the phone that it was only a matter of time. He said, and I will never forget these words, "The old folks won't be around forever, and the kids are already on board." The letter shook in my hands. The grief I felt was suddenly eclipsed by a white-hot, righteous fury. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a case of generational differences in financial planning. This was a conspiracy, a cold, calculated plot to liquidate our lives the moment my wife's heart stopped beating. My own children, on board. They had been waiting for her to die. That phone call changed everything, the letter continued, and I could feel the shift in her tone from heartbroken mother to brilliant strategist. The real Serafina. My grief turned into a plan. I could not let them do it, Silas. I could not let them bulldoze our memories to build their glass towers of greed. So I began to fight back in secret. That is why I am not in that coffin, my love. I was cremated privately 2 days before the funeral. My ashes are with my dearest friend Esther May, a woman whose loyalty is as true as steel. What you buried was an empty box. I couldn't bear the thought of them standing over my body, weeping their false tears and plotting their next move. Denying them that final performance was my last act of defiance. The message you received was from Esther. The phrase, "I'm alive," is not a literal truth, Silas. It is our code. It means my plan is alive. My will to protect you and everything we built together is alive. Esther will be your guide. She holds the other pieces of this puzzle. The phone in this box is for communicating with her and our new lawyer, Mr. Davies. Do not use your own phone. Do not trust the old family lawyer. I discovered that David has been paying his son's college tuition for the past 2 years. He has been compromised. Mr. Davies is the only one you can trust. Everything is in place, my love. The documents in this box are your weapons, the real will, the new trust agreements that move the majority of our liquid assets out of their reach, the deed to the house now structured in a way they cannot touch. You now hold the keys to it all. They will fight you. They will be vicious. They will try to make you believe you are old and confused. They will try to use your grief against you. Do not let them. You are Silas Jefferson, the strongest, most honorable man I have ever known. You built our life from nothing but sawdust and dreams. Now you must protect it. Fight for us, Silas. Fight for the memory of our love and the sanctity of our home. She ended the letter with a final heartbreaking line that shattered what was left of my composure. I will be waiting for you in the Garden of Magnolias, my love. All my love forever. Sarah. I sat in that sterile, silent room, the letter clutched in my hand, and I wept. I wept for the woman I had lost, for the months I had been blind to her suffering. I wept for the children I had lost, the children I now knew had never truly existed. And I wept for the lonely, difficult road that lay ahead of me. But as the tears subsided, something else took their place. The fire that had been smoldering in my chest was now a controlled, focused inferno. The grief was still there, a great gaping wound, but it was no longer just a wound. Serafina had transformed it. She had forged it into a shield. She had sharpened it into a sword. I was not just a grieving husband. I was an executor. I was the last soldier in a war my wife had started, and I would not fail her. I would not let them win. I sat in that sterile, silent room for a long time, the letter clutched in my hand, the ghost of my wife's words echoing in the airless space. The grief was a raging storm inside me, a tempest of sorrow and fury. Serafina hadn't just died. She had been a casualty in a war I never knew was being waged, and she had left me the weapons to win it. My gaze shifted to the other items in the cold metal box. The stack of legal documents bound in blue felt like a shield, and the burner phone still in its plastic felt like a sword. This was her last gift to me, not a memory, but a mission. With a newfound steadiness in my hands, I unwrapped the phone. It was simple, anonymous, a tool for a world of secrets I was now a part of. As my thumb pressed the power button, the screen flickered to life. It buzzed almost immediately with a single waiting text message. "Are you ready, Silas?" It was from a number I didn't recognize, but a name was attached. Esther. I typed back one single definitive word. Yes. I was about to place the phone in my pocket when it began to ring, a shrill, jarring sound in the profound quiet of the vault's viewing room. It startled me, my heart leaping into my throat. I fumbled with the device before answering, my voice hoarse. "Hello?" A voice came through, warm and familiar, yet laced with a firm, no-nonsense strength I had always admired. It was Esther May, Serafina's best and oldest friend. "Silas," she asked, her voice a comforting balm on my raw nerves. "Esther." I breathed, a wave of relief washing over me. I was not entirely alone in this. "She told me you'd know what to do when you were ready," Esther said, her tone direct and purposeful. There was no time wasted on pleasantries. She knew the stakes. "I have her, Silas. She's at peace. I made sure of it, just like I promised. Now we have to protect you." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice that of a soldier asking for orders. "First you leave that bank and you go straight home," she instructed, her voice clear and commanding. "Lock the doors. Do not speak to Marcus or Naomi or that snake David. They will try to pressure you. They will try to confuse you. Do not let them in. Do not answer their calls. Mr. Davies, the lawyer Serafina hired, will contact you on this phone tomorrow morning with the next steps. Trust no one but him and me. Do you understand?" "I understand," I said, the words forming a vow. "Good," she said. "Sarah chose well. She knew you were a fighter. Be strong, Silas. For her." And then she was gone. The conversation was over in less than a minute, but it had changed everything. It had transformed the abstract plan from the letter into a concrete, actionable reality. I had allies. I had instructions. I was no longer just reacting. I was part of a counter-offensive. Just as I was carefully packing the documents and the burner phone back into my briefcase, a different sound shattered the quiet. The familiar, cheerful ringtone from my own smartphone, the one in my jacket pocket. The one I wasn't supposed to be using. My blood ran cold when I saw the caller ID. It was Marcus. This was the clash of two worlds. The secret world of Sarah's plan and the immediate, dangerous world of my children's greed. My first instinct was to follow Esther's command and ignore the call. But a different instinct, that of a strategist who needs to know his enemy's movements, took over. I needed to know what they were planning now. I took a breath and answered. Dad Marcus's voice was sharp, impatient, stripped of all the fake sympathy from the day before. "Listen to me. I know you were upset yesterday. We all were. This is a stressful time, but we need to be adults about this. David and I are coming over. We have the estate management papers. Our lawyer says it's imperative you sign them today so we can begin managing the assets. It's for your own protection. We'll be there in 20 minutes. He didn't wait for a reply. The line went dead. It wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. The sheer breathtaking hypocrisy of it almost knocked the wind out of me. As I was sitting here holding the very proof of their betrayal in my hands, they were on their way to my home to execute the next phase of their plan. They were coming to try and legally seize control of the fortune they believed was waiting for them. The time for quiet reflection was over. I walked out of that bank, my steps sure and steady. The drive home was not like the journey there. My mind was not a whirlwind of questions, it was a block of ice, calm, cold, and clear. I saw the world with a stark new precision. I was a general heading toward the front line, and the front line was my own front porch. I arrived home just as their luxury SUV was pulling into my driveway. They got out, Marcus and David, both dressed in suits, both carrying briefcases. They looked like a hostile acquisition team, not a grieving son and son-in-law. I met them at the front door, standing in the doorway, blocking their path. "Dad, move aside," Marcus said, his voice hard. "We're not here to argue." "Then why are you here?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. David stepped forward, holding up his briefcase. "Silas, we have the papers. This is about protecting your financial future. It's a simple power of attorney to allow Marcus to manage the estate. It's what your wife would have wanted." And there it was, the final unforgivable insult, the last straw. To use her name, her memory as a justification for their theft while I was still reeling from the loving warning words she had written to me. The rage inside me was a silent, white-hot nova, but on the outside I was perfectly still. I looked at Marcus, my son, and saw nothing of the boy I had raised. I saw only a greedy, hollowed-out man. "Your mother," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel, "would be ashamed of you." Marcus actually flinched, but David's expression didn't change. He simply opened his briefcase and pulled out the documents, holding them out with a pen. "Sign the papers, Silas. Get off my property," I said. "Don't be a fool." Marcus spat, his frustration finally boiling over. "You're an old man. You don't know what you're doing. This is for your own good. It's what Mom would have wanted. For us to take care of things. To take care of you." That was the line. The one that severed the final thread of any lingering sentiment I might have had. To hear that lie, that monstrous self-serving perversion of Serafina's love from the mouth of my own son, while the truth of his betrayal was a fresh bleeding wound in my soul. It was the moment the war truly began. I looked from his furious face to the papers in David's hand and then back again. My decision was made. There would be no more negotiating. There would be no more appeals to a love that didn't exist. There would only be the plan, Serafina's plan. I simply shook my head, a slow, final gesture of refusal, and closed the door in their stunned, angry faces. The deadbolt sliding home was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The call from Mr. Davies came the next morning on the burner phone. His voice was calm and precise, a steady anchor in my turbulent world. "Silas," he said, "they have taken the bait. Their lawyer has made informal inquiries about the process for filing a conservatorship petition. They are gathering their ammunition. Now we must give them the gun to shoot themselves with." He explained the next phase of the plan. It was audacious, it was dangerous, and it relied entirely on my ability to become the man they wanted me to be. That afternoon, Esther May came to visit. She brought a small, beautifully wrapped gift. "Something to keep you company," she said, her eyes twinkling with a shared secret. I unwrapped it to find a sleek, modern digital photo frame. "Sarah would have loved this," I said, my voice thick with genuine emotion. "Yes, she would have," Esther replied, her smile tightening. "She also would have loved the high-definition wide-angle camera hidden inside it. Mr. Davies had it specially made." She showed me the tiny, almost invisible lens nestled discreetly in the frame's dark border. She showed me how it recorded video and audio to a hidden memory card, all while innocently cycling through photographs. "Davies says they'll need to manufacture evidence of your mental decline," she explained. "He expects them to bring in their own doctor. We need to be ready to record it when they do. Put it on the mantelpiece facing your armchair. Keep it running at all times." We spent an hour loading the frame with old pictures of Sarah and me, a lifetime of happy memories that would now serve as the backdrop for a grim deception. 2 days later, the expected call came. It was David. His voice, a slick, poisonous honey. "Dad," he began, "Naomi and I were talking, and we're still so worried about you rattling around in that big house all alone. I have a friend, a wonderful man named Dr. Fields. He's a specialist in geriatric health, one of the best. He's offered to just stop by for a friendly, informal chat. No pressure at all. Just to make sure you're getting everything you need. Would that be okay? I summoned the voice of a weary, resigned old man. Oh, I don't know, son. I sighed into the phone. So many people coming and going. It's all so confusing. It'll be very quiet, I promise, David cooed. He's very gentle. We'll be there this afternoon. He hung up before I could object further, which was exactly what I had expected. I walked into the living room and checked the photo frame on the mantelpiece. A picture of Sarah and me on our wedding day smiled back at me. I tapped the side, ensuring the small blue recording light was blinking discreetly on the back panel. The stage was set. It was time for my performance. When they arrived, David was all smiles, but his eyes were sharp and predatory. The man with him, Dr. Fields, was not what I expected. He didn't look like a doctor. He looked like David. He wore an expensive suit, a flashy watch, and had the overconfident, predatory smile of a salesman about to close a big deal. He carried a slim leather briefcase, not a medical bag. Dad. This is my friend Dr. Mark Fields, David said, gesturing to the man. Mark, this is my father-in-law, Silas. The doctor shook my hand, his grip firm, his eyes giving me a quick, assessing glance. A pleasure to meet you, Silas, he said. I'm sorry for your loss. David and Naomi have told me what a wonderful woman your wife was. We sat in the living room. I took my usual armchair directly in the line of sight of the hidden camera. David and Dr. Fields sat on the sofa opposite me. David started his voice loud and slow as if he were speaking to a child or a deaf person. So Mark, as I was telling you, we're just a little concerned about Dad. He's been having some memory lapses since Mom passed. A little confused now and then. It's understandable, of course, but we want to make sure he's safe. Dr. Fields nodded, pulling out a notepad. He clicked his expensive pen. Of course. Silas, he said, turning his slick smile on me. This is just a chat. Nothing to worry about. Can you tell me what year it is? I looked at him, my expression blank. I let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment. Is it 1998? I asked, my voice weak and uncertain. I saw the flicker of triumph in David's eyes. Dr. Fields scribbled a note. No, Silas, he said gently. It's 2025, that's all right. Sometimes these things slip our minds. Do you find yourself forgetting things often? Misplacing your keys, perhaps? Sometimes I mumbled, looking down at my hands. Sometimes I go into a room and forget why I'm there. Internally, I was a block of ice watching, analyzing, cataloging every leading question, every smug glance. The doctor continued his questions, becoming more pointed. David mentioned that you've had some unusual ideas recently. Do you ever see or hear things that aren't really there? Maybe your late wife. This was the moment. I had to sell the lie completely. I looked up, but not at him. I looked toward the empty armchair where Sarah always sat. A soft, sad smile touched my lips. She's not gone, you know, I whispered as if sharing a secret. She talks to me, in the quiet moments. She tells me what to do. She told me not to trust people. I let my voice trail off and looked back at them, my eyes wide with a manufactured childlike sincerity. She's helping me. It was perfect. It was exactly the kind of statement they could twist into a narrative of senility and delusion. David could barely contain his glee. He shot Dr. Fields a look that was practically a victory lap. The doctor scribbled furiously on his notepad. The rest of the assessment continued in the same vein. I gave confused answers. I drifted off mid-sentence. I appeared to fall asleep for a moment. I was playing the part of a man whose mind was crumbling under the weight of grief, and they were the rapt, appreciative audience. Finally, Dr. Fields closed his notepad. He stood up and patted my hand in a gesture of condescending pity. He's a strong man, he said to David, but loud enough for me to hear. But the grief has caused some significant cognitive disorientation. We should definitely keep a close eye on him. It wasn't a diagnosis. It was a pre-written conclusion. They walked toward the door. As David opened it, I heard him say to his friend in a low, conspiratorial voice, "Thanks, Mark. That's exactly what we needed. I owe you one." The door closed, and I was alone again. The silence rushed back in, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of a trap that had been successfully sprung. I slowly rose from my chair and walked over to the mantelpiece. The digital frame was innocently scrolling through my life with Serafina. A photo of us on our wedding day. A photo of us holding Marcus as a newborn. A photo of us laughing on a beach, old and gray and happy. I looked at her smiling face, and then I looked at the tiny invisible lens hidden in the frame. A grim, cold satisfaction settled over me. Their arrogance had made them blind, and I had it all. Every lie, every condescending question, every triumphant glance. I had the rope, and soon it would be time to pull it tight. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. I lived a dual existence. On the outside, I was the man my children wanted me to be. A ghost, haunting the halls of my own home, lost in a fog of grief and confusion. I would leave mail unopened on the table for Marcus to sort. I would call Naomi and ask her the same question twice in one conversation. I spoke often of Serafina in the present tense as if she had just stepped into the other room. I was building my character line by line, gesture by gesture, creating the perfect portrait of a man who had lost his grip on reality. I was giving them the rope. Inside, however, I was a different man entirely. Every night after the world was dark and quiet, I would retreat to my study, lock the door, and communicate with my allies on the burner phone. Mr. Davies updated me on the legal front, while Esther May kept me grounded, her steady voice a constant reminder of the woman we were both fighting for. I was more sharp, more focused, more alive than I had been in years. The grief was still a constant companion, but it had become a source of fuel, not a weight. It was the fire that hardened my resolve. The call I had been waiting for came on a Tuesday morning. It was Mr. Davies. His voice was calm, but I could hear an undercurrent of grim finality in it. "They've done it, Silas," he said without any preamble. "They filed the petition for conservatorship this morning. The trap has been set." As he spoke, my mind conjured the scene. I could see it as clearly as if I were a fly on the wall in their lawyer's office. I imagined them sitting there, the three of them, in the plush leather chairs of Mr. Henderson's downtown office. David would be the one leading the conversation, his movements smooth and confident, placing his expensive briefcase on the polished mahogany desk. He would be the picture of a concerned, responsible son-in-law forced to take a difficult but necessary step. "As you can see, Mr. Henderson," I could hear David's slick voice saying, "we've been more than patient. We've given him space. We've tried to help, but his condition is deteriorating." Naomi, my daughter, would be playing her part to perfection. I imagined her dabbing a tear from her eye with a silk handkerchief. "He's just not the same since Mother passed," she would say, her voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. "He gets so confused. The other day he was talking to her photograph as if she were right there in the room with him. He told me that she still talks to him. It's frightening. We're so afraid he's going to hurt himself or that someone will take advantage of him." Then it would be Marcus's turn, the voice of cold, hard logic. He would lean forward, adjusting his tie. "It's not just the emotional aspect," he would say, his tone serious and professional. "Financially, it's a disaster waiting to happen. I had to sort through his mail for him. He was about to let his home insurance lapse. He couldn't understand a simple utility bill. The man who once managed million-dollar architectural projects can't balance a checkbook anymore. He's vulnerable. The estate, everything my mother worked so hard for, is at risk if he's left in charge." And then the centerpiece of their deception. I could see David reaching into his briefcase and pulling out a document with a flourish, the sham medical report. "And this," David would say, sliding it across the desk to the lawyer, "is the most concerning part. We had a friend of mine, a specialist, Dr. Mark Fields, pay him a friendly visit. His assessment is, well, it's quite clear. He found significant cognitive disorientation, severe memory lapses, potential for delusion. The doctor believes he is no longer capable of making sound financial or medical decisions for himself." Their lawyer Henderson, a man who had shared Thanksgiving dinner in my home, would pick up the report and scan it with a grave expression. He would look at my children with feigned sympathy. "This is a very strong case," he would say, his voice full of false sincerity. "You are doing the right thing. It is a son's duty to protect his father even from himself. The court will see that you are acting in his best interests." I imagined them all nodding in solemn agreement, a tableau of righteous, loving concern. And then I pictured the moment of victory. Henderson would turn the legal petition toward them on the desk. "If you'll all just sign here," he would say. I could see their hands, my children's hands, reaching for the pen. The same hands I had held when they learned to walk. The same hands I had bandaged when they fell from their bikes. Now those hands were signing away my freedom, my identity, my life. They would sign with firm, confident strokes, their faces a mixture of grim duty and triumphant greed. And as soon as the ink was dry, their masks would fall away. I could hear David clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "It's done. The first step is over. We'll have the court order in a few weeks, and then we can finally start to get things in order." And by in order, he meant start the demolition. I could see the glint in his eye as he thought of the bulldozers of the high-rise towers that would soon stand where my wife's garden now grew. My vision of the scene faded, and I was back in my quiet study, the phone pressed to my ear. Mr. Davies was still speaking. "They cited the medical report, your general state of confusion, and what they're calling your delusional attachment to your late wife as their primary evidence," he was saying. "The hearing is set for 3 weeks from today. You will be served with the papers tomorrow." I looked at a photograph of Serafina on my desk. Her smile was as bright and defiant as ever. They had done it. They had willingly, arrogantly, and blindly walked right into the brilliant, beautiful trap she had set for them. A cold sense of calm settled over me. There was no more fear. There was no more confusion. There was only the path ahead. "Thank you for letting me know, Mr. Davies," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'll be ready." The official papers arrived the next morning, delivered by a humorless man who seemed annoyed to have to wait for me to shuffle to the door. I played my part, looking at the thick envelope with a vacant, confused expression. "What is this?" I asked, my voice thin and frail. "You've been served," the man said, his tone flat, and then he turned and walked away. I closed the door and carried the envelope to the kitchen table as if it were a venomous snake. My hands were steady as I tore it open. It was all there, laid out in cold legal language, the petition for conservatorship of the person and estate of Silas Jefferson. I read through the attached declarations, my children's words twisted into a grotesque parody of love and concern. I saw Naomi's sworn statement about my disturbing conversations with photographs. I saw Marcus's detailed account of my inability to comprehend basic financial documents. And I saw the centerpiece of their case, the signed official-looking report from Dr. Mark Fields, which concluded I was suffering from severe cognitive decline and delusional ideations. They had built a cage of lies on paper, and now they were coming to lock me inside it. I read every word, letting their betrayal wash over me, not as a wave of pain, but as a tide of cold, clarifying fury. They had handed me their entire battle plan. Now it was time to prepare my own. The next 3 weeks were a blur of methodical, relentless work. Mr. Davies's quiet, book-lined office became our war room. The atmosphere was not one of panic, but of focused intellectual intensity. It reminded me of the final push before a major architectural deadline, a time of sleepless nights and endless coffee, all driving toward a single, unchangeable date on the calendar. Only this time, I wasn't building a structure of steel and glass. We were building a case of irrefutable truth. Mr. Davies was a master strategist, calm and precise. "They believe their case rests on your perceived weakness," he explained during our first strategy session, tapping the fraudulent doctor's report with his pen. "Therefore, our case will rest on their hidden weaknesses. We will not simply defend you, Silas. We will prosecute their motives." Our first order of business was to dismantle their star witness. Davies hired a private investigator, a sharp, quiet man named Mr. Klein, to look into Dr. Mark Fields, while I continued my performance at home, fielding patronizing phone calls from Naomi about whether I was eating properly. Mr. Klein was quietly digging. The results came back within a week, and they were better than we could have hoped. Dr. Mark Fields was not a licensed geriatric psychiatrist. He wasn't even a practicing doctor. He had lost his medical license 7 years ago for insurance fraud. He was now a consultant, a man who lent his discredited credentials to shady business ventures. And his biggest client, the man who had been paying his office rent for the last year, was my son-in-law, David Clark. Mr. Davies smiled a thin, grim smile as he read the report. "This isn't just evidence," he said. "This is a landmine." Our second front was to expose the desperation behind their greed. Mr. Klein, our investigator, shifted his focus to David's finances. What he uncovered was a portrait of a man drowning in debt. There were 2 failed condominium projects, a string of angry investors, and a mountain of high-interest private loans. David wasn't just trying to get rich. He was trying to save himself from financial ruin. Our house wasn't a windfall for him, it was a lifeline. Davies then did something brilliant. He tracked down two of David's former business partners, men who had been cheated in a previous deal. After hearing our story, and with the promise of legal support, they agreed to testify about David's pattern of predatory behavior. While that was happening, Davies' legal team was filing subpoenas for Marcus's financial records. It took some legal wrangling, but they couldn't be denied. The documents revealed a story not of success, but of quiet desperation. My son, the financial wizard, had made a series of disastrously risky investments and had lost nearly half of his clients' money and a significant portion of his own. He was hiding massive losses. He didn't just want the inheritance, he needed it to cover his tracks and prevent his own professional implosion. My role in all of this was twofold. By day, I was the declining patriarch. By night, I was a forensic accountant. I spent hours in my study poring over decades of old bank statements and canceled checks. With the meticulousness of an architect reviewing a blueprint, I created a spreadsheet. It was a detailed, undeniable accounting of every dollar my children had taken from us over the years. The loans for down payments that were never mentioned again, the credit card bills we had paid off, the college tuition for their children that we had covered. The final number was staggering. It was a story of a slow, steady 20-year bleed. In the midst of this strategic storm, there was a quiet center. My meetings with Esther May. We would sit in her sunlit kitchen drinking tea, and she would prepare for her testimony. We went over her memories of Serafina's final months, not as a legal exercise, but as a tribute to our shared love for her. Esther would tell me about Sarah's courage, her unwavering clarity, even as her body failed her. She was never a victim. Silas Esther told me, her hand resting on mine, not for a moment. She was a warrior planning her last battle. My job is to be her voice in that courtroom, to make them hear her one last time. The final piece of our puzzle was my own mind. Mr. Davies arranged for a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation with a Dr. Lena Caldwell, a nationally respected, court-certified forensic psychiatrist. I spent a full day in her office undergoing hours of tests and interviews. I did not perform. I was simply myself. I spoke of my grief, of my love for my wife, and of the events that had led me to this point. I was sharp. I was clear. I was articulate. And I was angry. Her final report was a powerful, detailed testament to my mental competence, a clinical and professional weapon that we would keep hidden until the perfect moment. The 3 weeks passed in a flash. The night before the hearing, the three of us met one last time in Mr. Davies' office. The evidence was laid out on his large conference table, the investigators' reports, the sworn affidavits from David's ex-partners, Marcus's damning financial statements, my meticulous spreadsheet of loans, Dr. Caldwell's official evaluation, and finally a copy of Serafina's letter, which would be Esther's testimony. It was a mountain of truth poised to crash down on their mountain of lies. They will walk into that courtroom tomorrow feeling invincible, Mr. Davies said, his voice quiet and steady. They believe they are coming to formalize their victory. They have no idea they are walking into an ambush. I looked at the evidence, at the faces of my two allies, and I felt a profound sense of calm. The battle was no longer just about a house or a fortune. It was about honor. It was about truth. It was for Serafina. I was ready. The days leading up to the official notice were a strange, tense ballet of deception. I continued my performance as the grieving, absent-minded patriarch. I would call Naomi to ask what day it was. I would let Marcus's calls go to voicemail, only to call him back hours later apologizing that I must have misplaced my phone again. They were patient, their voices dripping with a condescending sweetness that curdled my stomach. They were so sure of their victory, so confident in the cage of lies they had built, that they didn't notice the steel bars of the trap that was closing around them. I was living in the quiet eye of the hurricane, a place of deceptive calm before the final destructive winds were unleashed. I spent most of my time in Serafina's garden. It was the only place I felt truly at peace, the only place where the weight of my performance seemed to lift. I would spend hours on my knees, my hands deep in the rich soil, tending to her prize-winning roses. Each bloom was a memory, a testament to her patience and her love of beautiful things. As I pruned the dead branches and weeded the beds, I would talk to her not in the delusional way I pretended for my children, but in the quiet, conversational way of a man who has spent 50 years with his other half. I would tell her about the lawyers, about Esther, about the plan, and in the rustle of the leaves and the scent of the blossoms, I would feel her strength, her approval. This garden was her legacy, a living, breathing thing of beauty, and I was its guardian. The summons came on a Thursday afternoon. The sky was a brilliant cloudless blue and the air was warm. I was on the patio sipping a glass of iced tea when I heard the sharp official rap on the front door. It was a sound that did not belong in the peaceful afternoon, a sound that spoke of business and bureaucracy. My heart, which had been beating with a slow, steady rhythm, gave a single hard thud. I knew what this was. I took a moment to compose myself, to let the mask of the confused old man settle back over my features. I walked slowly through the house, my steps a deliberate shuffling gait. I opened the door to find a man in a rumpled suit holding a thick, legal-sized envelope. He looked bored, as if he had delivered 100 of these declarations of war and would deliver 100 more before his day was done. "Are you Silas Jefferson?" he asked, his voice flat and impersonal. I blinked at him, my expression vacant. "Yes," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Can I help you?" "You've been served," he said. He pushed the thick envelope into my hands, turned without another word, and walked back down the path to his car. He didn't look back. To him, I was just a name on a list, another piece of paper delivered. He had no idea he had just handed a soldier his marching orders. I closed the door. The weight of the envelope in my hands feeling both heavy and insubstantial. I played my part for a moment longer for the benefit of any watching eyes, for the muscle memory of the role I had been forced to inhabit. I looked down at the official-looking document with a dazed expression. "What is this?" I murmured to the empty hallway. "Is it from Marcus Moore Bills?" Then I walked not to the kitchen table where the mail usually piled up, but to my study. I closed the door, the sound of the latch clicking into place, a final definitive seal on my privacy. The performance was over for today. The man, the soldier, was back. I sat down at my desk and opened the envelope. The document inside was cold and imposing. The official seal of the Fulton County Superior Court was at the top. The language was dense, a thicket of legal terms designed to intimidate and confuse, but the names were brutally clear. In the matter of the conservatorship of Silas Jefferson, petitioner Marcus Jefferson, co-petitioner Naomi Clark, respondent Silas Jefferson, it was all there. A formal declaration of war from my own flesh and blood. They were no longer just my children. They were the opposition. I read the date for the hearing stamped in unforgiving red ink at the bottom of the page. October 15th, 2 weeks away. A strange sense of calm washed over me. All the anxiety, all the uncertainty of the past few weeks evaporated. The waiting was over. The date of the battle was set. There was no more speculation, no more wondering when they would make their move. The move had been made. The challenge had been issued. And I was ready to meet it. I did not feel fear. An old soldier once told me that the moments before a battle are the quietest. The fear comes earlier in the long nights of waiting, and it comes later in the chaos of the fight. But in the moment the orders arrive, there is only a profound and chilling clarity. That is what I felt. I was a general on the eve of a great battle, reviewing the map of the terrain, confident in the preparations that had been made, and resolute in the justice of my cause. I thought of Seraphina. I thought of her courage as she faced her own mortality, her brilliance in crafting this intricate, powerful defense. I was not just fighting for myself, for my home, for my freedom. I was fighting for her. I was the champion of her legacy, the guardian of her honor, and I would not fail. I reached for the burner phone, the simple anonymous device that had become my most trusted tool. My fingers were perfectly steady as I dialed the number for Mr. Davies. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Davies," I said, my voice low, clear, and devoid of any of the weakness I had been performing for weeks. "It's Silas. I have the papers. The battle is set for the 15th. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then his calm, confident voice came through. "I see. Then it's time to prepare our soldiers for review." "Indeed," I said, a grim sense of anticipation settling over me. "Let them come. We'll be ready." The courtroom was a cold, cavernous space, all polished wood and somber lighting. It smelled of old paper and anxiety. The air was still and heavy, and the silence was broken only by the quiet shuffling of papers and the low hum of the air conditioning. It felt a world away from the warmth of my home, from the scent of Seraphina's roses in the garden. This was a place of sterile facts and hard judgments, a place where a life could be unmade with the stroke of a pen. I sat beside Mr. Davies at the respondent's table. I had followed his instructions to the letter. I wore an old, slightly frayed cardigan over a faded shirt. I hadn't shaved in 2 days. I looked, I hoped, like a man who was drowning a man for whom dressing himself was a monumental effort. I kept my eyes downcast, my hands clasped loosely in my lap, the picture of a frail, defeated old man. In the gallery behind me, I could feel the steady, reassuring presence of Esther May. She was my silent anchor in this sea of lies. On the other side of the room sat my children. Marcus, Naomi, and David were arranged at their table with their lawyer, Mr. Henderson. They were dressed in dark, conservative suits, their faces composed into masks of solemn, reluctant duty. They looked like a family in mourning, forced to perform a painful but necessary act of love. But I saw the truth in the brief, confident glances they exchanged, in the almost imperceptible smirk on David's lips. They were not here for an act of love. They were here for a coronation. The judge, a woman with a stern but intelligent face, entered, and we all rose. The proceedings began. Mr. Henderson approached the bench, his movements slow and deliberate, his voice a low, respectful murmur that filled the room. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here today with a heavy heart. No child ever wishes to find themselves in this position, questioning the capacity of a parent they love and admire. My clients Marcus Jefferson and Naomi Clark are here today, not out of greed or malice, but out of a deep and desperate concern for the well-being of their father, Mr. Silas Jefferson." He gestured toward me. I could feel the eyes of the judge settle on me, and I made myself look smaller, more confused. Since the recent and tragic passing of his beloved wife, Seraphina Henderson, continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Mr. Jefferson's state of mind has understandably deteriorated significantly. He has become confused, forgetful, and is suffering from delusions that, while perhaps understandable in a grieving man, now pose a significant threat to his own safety and to the estate his wife worked so hard to build. This petition for conservatorship is a last resort, an act of protection for a man who can no longer protect himself. It was a masterful opening, painting them as dutiful children and me as a tragic victim. Then he began to build his cage of lies brick by brick. He called his first witness, my son Marcus. Marcus walked to the stand and took the oath. He looked directly at the judge, his face a picture of earnest concern. Henderson began his questions. "Mr. Jefferson, can you please describe your father's financial acumen before your mother's passing?" "He was always sharp," Marcus said. "Meticulous. He was an architect after all. He understood budgets, numbers, contracts." "And what have you observed since your mother's death?" Marcus sighed a heavy theatrical sound. "It's all gone, Your Honor. He's completely lost. I had to go over to his house to sort his mail for him. He had unpaid bills, insurance policies about to lapse. I tried to explain a simple utility bill to him, and he couldn't grasp it. He said his wife had always handled it. It was like the basic principles of finance had vanished from his mind. He's vulnerable. Anyone could take advantage of him." I sat there listening to him twist the performance I had given him into a damning indictment. Every lie he told was a perfect echo of a truth I had manufactured. Henderson then called his next witness, my daughter Naomi. She took the stand, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief before she even began to speak. Her voice was a fragile, trembling thing. "Mrs. Clark," Henderson said gently, "can you tell the court about your father's emotional state? He's lost in the past." Naomi wept. "He forgets what day it is. He forgets conversations we just had. And he talks to my mother. All the time." She paused, taking a shuddering breath. "I was at the house last week, and he was sitting in the living room holding one of her old photo albums. And he was speaking to her picture, Your Honor, as if she were sitting right there next to him. He was asking her if she remembered a day at the lake. It was terrifying. He believes she's still with him, that she's still talking to him." The lie was so perfectly constructed, so beautifully performed, that for a moment even I felt a chill. She was describing a scene I had carefully staged, but she imbued it with a chilling verisimilitude. Then came their final decisive blow. "Your Honor," Henderson announced, holding up a bound document. Out of concern for their father's health, My clients arranged for an informal consultation with a respected geriatric specialist, Dr. Mark Fields. We would like to submit his report as evidence. He handed the document to the clerk. The judge read it, her expression unreadable. Henderson read key phrases aloud for the court record: significant cognitive disorientation, pronounced memory deficits. Subject is experiencing delusional ideations likely brought on by grief-induced psychosis. It is my professional opinion that Mr. Jefferson is no longer capable of making sound financial or medical decisions for himself and is a potential danger to his own welfare. It was the climax of their performance. The supposedly unbiased professional opinion that tied all their anecdotal evidence together into a neat, damning package. David, sitting at the table, allowed himself a small, smug smile. He thought he had won. Henderson concluded with a final impassioned plea. Your Honor, Marcus and Naomi love their father. It is that love that brings them here today. They are asking the court to grant this conservatorship so they can provide their father with the care he so desperately needs, and to protect the legacy that their beloved mother Serafina entrusted to him. They are asking to be the guardians of their father because he can no longer be the guardian of himself. The hypocrisy of that final sentence was a physical blow. To use Serafina's name to claim to be protecting her legacy while actively trying to destroy it was a desecration. I felt a surge of pure, cold rage. But on the outside, I did nothing. I just sat there looking down at my worn-out shoes, the very picture of a broken man, a confused old father who was about to have his entire life stolen from him by his loving, concerned children. I could feel the weight of their victory settling over the room. Their case was made. Their lies were told. And now the judge was turning her stern, assessing gaze toward my table, toward Mr. Davies. It was our turn. The air in the courtroom was thick with the wreckage of their lies. David was a collapsed ruin in his chair, his face ashen. Marcus stared into the middle distance, his confident mask shattered, revealing the panicked, desperate man beneath. Naomi was looking at her husband with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror, as if seeing him for the first time. Their lawyer, Mr. Henderson, looked utterly defeated, a man who knew he had been played for a fool. The judge's gaze was like a shard of ice fixed on the petitioner's table with unconcealed contempt. Into this ringing silence, Mr. Davies's voice was a calm, steady instrument of truth. Your Honor, he said, the petitioners have claimed they are here to honor the legacy of Serafina Jefferson. We believe it is time the court heard what that legacy truly is in her own words. He turned to the back of the courtroom. The defense calls its final witness, Mrs. Esther May Washington. Esther rose from her seat in the gallery and walked toward the witness stand. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, a woman carrying the weight of a sacred duty. She was the picture of dignity, her presence a quiet rebuke to the chaos and deception that had filled the room. She took the oath, her voice clear and strong, and sat down, her eyes finding mine for a brief, steadying moment. Mr. Davies approached her. Mrs. Washington, would you please state for the court the nature and duration of your relationship with the late Serafina Jefferson? She was my best friend, Esther said, a soft, sad smile touching her lips. My sister in all but blood. We knew each other for 63 years since we were little girls with braids in our hair. And in the final months of her life, did Mrs. Jefferson entrust you with anything? Davies asked. She entrusted me with many things, Esther replied. Her fears, her sorrows, and her final wishes. She entrusted me with her final words. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a familiar cream-colored envelope. My heart ached as I recognized it. It was Sarah's letter. Your Honor, Mr. Davies said, addressing the judge. The petitioners have put Serafina Jefferson's state of mind and her true wishes at the very center of this case. We ask for the court's permission to have Mrs. Washington read this letter written by Mrs. Jefferson in her final months into the official record. Henderson jolted back to life, shot to his feet. Objection. Hearsay. The document is unverified. The judge didn't even glance at him. Her eyes were fixed on Esther. Overruled, Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice sharp as a razor. I am very interested in hearing what Mrs. Jefferson had to say. You may proceed, Mrs. Washington. Esther put on a pair of simple reading glasses. She unfolded the pages, her hands perfectly steady. The entire courtroom leaned forward, held captive. And then she began to read. Her voice was not a perfect imitation of Serafina's, but she spoke with such love, such profound understanding, that it was as if my wife's spirit had filled the room. My dearest Silas, Esther began, and I closed my eyes, the words washing over me. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and our children have already begun to show their true colors. I am so sorry, my love, for the secrets I had to keep." She read the part about the cancer diagnosis, about Sarah's decision to live out her final days not as a patient, but as a wife. A quiet sorrow filled the room. Then Esther's voice took on a harder, sadder edge as she began the next part. "I saw the way Marcus's eyes lit up when he spoke about our portfolio, not our family. I saw how David's ambition had become a poison in Naomi's soul. What mother wants to admit she has raised children who see her love as a line of credit? I opened my eyes and looked at my son. Marcus flinched as if he had been physically struck. His face, which had been pale with shock, now flushed a deep mottled red of pure shame. He could not meet my gaze. He stared down at the polished table, utterly broken. Esther continued, her voice unwavering, reading the most devastating part of the letter. The part about David's phone call. He was talking to a developer, she read. Sarah's words cutting through the silence. He called our home the cornerstone parcel. He spoke of tearing it down. He told the man on the phone that it was only a matter of time. He said, and I will never forget these words, "The old folks won't be around forever, and the kids are already on board." At these words, a sound escaped from Naomi. It was a low, wounded cry, the sound of a heart breaking. She stared at David, her husband, her partner, and in her eyes I saw the final, horrifying realization of the depth of his betrayal and of her own complicity. The tears that now streamed down her face were not the crocodile tears of her earlier performance. They were the scalding, real tears of guilt and shame. She began to sob deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. David himself seemed to shrink, to collapse inward. He was no longer a slick developer or a confident predator. He was just a man exposed and ruined, his character assassinated by the words of the woman he had so grievously underestimated. Esther's voice softened as she read the final lines of the letter, her words now a direct message of love to me across the void. "Fight for us, Silas. Fight for the memory of our love. I will be waiting for you in the Garden of Magnolias. All my love forever. Sarah." She finished reading and carefully folded the letter. She looked at the judge, then at me, her duty done. The only sound in the entire courtroom was the sound of my daughter's heartbroken, uncontrollable weeping. The judge looked at the petitioner's table not with anger anymore, but with a profound and weary sadness. The legal arguments were over. The truth in all its tragic and beautiful clarity had finally been heard, and it had been spoken in the voice of my wife. The sound of Naomi's weeping was the only sound in the courtroom. It was a raw, ugly sound, the sound of a soul being stripped bare. The judge watched them, her face a mixture of pity and stern disapproval. David was a statue of shame, his head bowed. Marcus stared at his hands, his knuckles white as if seeing them for the first time. The edifice of their righteousness, so carefully constructed, had been brought down by the voice of the woman they had betrayed. I thought for a moment that this was the end, that there was nothing more to be said. But I had underestimated the thoroughness of my wife's plan. I had underestimated the precision of her justice. Mr. Davies allowed the silence to hang in the air for a long, heavy moment, letting the weight of Seraphina's words settle into the room. Then he moved. He walked back to our table and picked up a thick, blue-bound document. "Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the sound of Naomi's sobs. "In light of the testimony we have just heard, which speaks directly and unequivocally to the final wishes and state of mind of Seraphina Jefferson, the defense would now like to formally submit into evidence the last will and testament of the deceased. This document was executed 3 months prior to her passing, witnessed by 2 independent parties and notarized in my presence." He handed the official sealed document to the court clerk, who in turn passed it up to the judge. The judge accepted it, breaking the seal with a practiced efficiency. She began to read, her eyes scanning the pages, her expression unreadable. My children watched her, a new kind of tension replacing their emotional devastation. Naomi's sobs subsided into hiccuping breaths. Marcus looked up, his face pale with a dawning, desperate hope. Perhaps the letter was just emotion. Perhaps the legal document, the one that truly mattered, would tell a different story. Perhaps their mother's anger had not extended to the cold, hard reality of her fortune. After what felt like an eternity, the judge finished reading. She placed the document on her bench and looked at Mr. Davies. "The will appears to be in perfect legal order," she stated, her voice flat and official. Does counsel wish to state the relevant articles for the record? I do, Your Honor, Davies replied. He held his own copy of the will. First, under Article 1, this document hereby revokes any and all previous wills and testaments made by Seraphina Jefferson, rendering them null and void. At the petitioner's table, Mr. Henderson, their lawyer, visibly flinched. The original will, the one that had promised them everything, was now officially worthless. Mr. Davies continued, his voice even and methodical. Under Article 2, the home and property at 172 Willow Creek Lane are to be handled by the Jefferson Family Heritage Trust as previously discussed. Under Article 3, all liquid assets, stocks, bonds, and personal effects not otherwise specified are to be managed by the Seraphina Jefferson Community Trust. He paused, letting the weight of those statements sink in. He was closing all the doors one by one. Then he arrived at the final most important article. And under Article 4, he said, his voice dropping slightly, pertaining to the bequests for her surviving children. He let the silence stretch, a masterful piece of courtroom theater. I saw Marcus lean forward, his entire body tense with anticipation. Mr. Davies looked directly at the petitioner's table. The will states the following. To my son Marcus Jefferson, for the love and support he has shown me, I leave the sum of $100. The breath went out of Marcus in a stunned, audible gasp. His face, which had been pale with hope, was now a mask of pure, slack-jawed disbelief. Mr. Davies continued, his tone unchanged. To my daughter Naomi Clark, for the care and compassion she has provided, I leave the sum of $100. Naomi's crying stopped instantly. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face a picture of utter, uncomprehending shock. $100. The number was so small, so precise, so insulting that it defied all reason. It wasn't a disinheritance. It was a judgment. Marcus shot to his feet, his chair screeching backward on the polished floor. That's impossible, he sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at Davies. That's a joke. My mother's estate is worth millions. That can't be legal. Henderson was on his feet beside him. Objection, Your Honor. This is clearly punitive. It's evidence of an unsound mind. A woman in her right senses would not do such a thing. The judge looked down at them with an expression of pure ice. Sit down, Mr. Henderson. Sit down, Mr. Jefferson. Marcus, trembling with rage and disbelief, slowly sank back into his chair. Mr. Davies did not even seem to have noticed the outburst. On the contrary, Your Honor, he said calmly, the will is the product of a mind that was in its final months more sound and clear than ever before. Seraphina Jefferson was a meticulous woman. She did not want there to be any confusion about her intentions. That is why she included a specific addendum to Article 4 explaining this very bequest. With the court's permission, I will read it now. The judge nodded. Permission granted. Mr. Davies turned a page and read from the addendum. His voice was no longer his own. It was the voice of Seraphina's cold, final, and inescapable logic. My children have demonstrated to me over many years that the value they place on my love is purely transactional, he read. The words were a hammer blow in the silent room. They have taken hundreds of thousands of dollars from their father and me, all while offering nothing of their hearts in return. Therefore, as my final act as their mother, I will meet them on the terms they have established. I leave them a transactional amount. $100 for each of them, the price of a moderately nice dinner for two. This is more than they have ever offered me without expecting something of greater value in return. May they spend it wisely. It is the last dollar they will ever receive from me or my estate. The explanation was more devastating than the bequest itself. It was not an act of madness. It was an act of perfect, chilling clarity. It was a final maternal lesson on the subject of value delivered in the only language they seemed to understand. Marcus slumped in his chair as if his spine had been removed, his face ashen. Naomi let out a low, despairing moan, burying her face in her hands. David, the architect of their ruin, simply closed his eyes, a man finally and utterly defeated. I looked at them, my children, and I felt no joy, no triumph, only a profound and sorrowful sense of justice. It was a terrible, necessary thing. Seraphina had not done this out of spite. She had done it to hold up a mirror to their souls. And in the cold, hard reflection of that final $100 inheritance, they were finally forced to see the truth of what they had become. The emotional devastation in the courtroom was a palpable thing. My children were shattered not by the loss of a fortune they had not yet processed, but by the final, unequivocal judgment of their mother. The $100 inheritance was a moral verdict from which there was no appeal. I saw Mr. Henderson, their lawyer, begin to shuffle his papers, preparing to surrender. He, like everyone else, assumed the battle was over. He was wrong. Seraphina's justice was not merely punitive. It was creative. It was restorative. And the final, most brilliant act was yet to be revealed. The judge, her face grim, looked at Mr. Davies. "Counsel," she said, her voice heavy with the finality of it all, "unless you have anything further, I believe this court has heard enough. I have one final point." "Your Honor," Mr. Davies said, his voice as calm as ever. "It pertains to Article 3 of the will which my client's letter referred to as her true legacy. It concerns the primary beneficiary of the estate, the Seraphina Jefferson Community Trust." Henderson sighed, a weary, defeated sound. "Your Honor, the disposition of assets to a charity, while admirable, is not relevant to this conservatorship hearing. The petitioner's case has clearly collapsed. We can move on to the dismissal. He wanted it to be over. He wanted to stop the bleeding. On the contrary, Your Honor," Mr. Davies countered, his voice suddenly sharp and commanding, "the specific mandate of this trust is perhaps the single most compelling piece of evidence of Seraphina Jefferson's sound, strategic, and profoundly logical state of mind. Furthermore, it speaks directly to the core motives of the petitioners, and in particular, the motives of Mr. David Clark." A flicker of interest appeared in the judge's tired eyes. She looked at David, who was still slumped in his chair, a hollowed-out man. "The court's interest is piqued, Mr. Davies," she said. "Proceed." Mr. Davies walked to a large easel that had been discreetly placed in the corner of the courtroom. First, he began, "Let's talk about the assets. My client, in the 8 months following her diagnosis, quietly and legally liquidated a significant portion of her and Mr. Jefferson's stock portfolio and other non-essential assets. The total sum she transferred into this newly created trust was $7,400,000. Another gasp went through the room. Marcus's head snapped up again, his eyes wide with a new kind of agony. He was a numbers man. The thought of that much money, a fortune he had believed was his, being moved completely out of his reach, was a fresh and terrible torment. Now for the trust itself, Davies continued, flipping a page on the easel to reveal the trust's mission statement in large, bold letters. He read it aloud. "The Seraphina Jefferson Community Trust is dedicated to preserving the cultural, historical, and economic integrity of Atlanta's historic neighborhoods. Its mission is to empower long-term residents and small business owners to resist predatory development and to foster a community built on stability, not speculation." The words were beautiful, noble, but they were just words. It was what came next that held the true devastating power. Davies explained the trust's mechanism, the specific tools Seraphina had legally encoded into its charter. "The trust has a three-pronged approach, Your Honor," he said, his voice that of a professor giving a lecture. "First, it will provide zero-interest loans and outright grants to low- and middle-income homeowners in historically black neighborhoods for the purpose of property maintenance and renovation. This is designed to help long-term residents avoid code violations and resist the pressure to sell to developers." He paused. "Second, the trust is legally empowered to purchase at fair market value at-risk residential and commercial properties. These properties will then be placed into a land trust to be converted into permanently affordable rental housing and community-owned commercial spaces such as grocery stores, daycare centers, and local workshops. They can never be sold to private developers. And third," he said, his voice hardening slightly, "the trust will provide pro bono legal services for any long-term tenant in these neighborhoods who is facing eviction without just cause from new landlords seeking to flip properties." He let the mechanics of the plan sink in. It was a shield, a multi-million-dollar shield to protect the very people David and his kind saw as obstacles. But it wasn't just a shield. It was a sword. Mr. Davies then walked to the easel and pulled off the top sheet, revealing a large, detailed map of a section of Atlanta. "This," he said, tapping the map, "is a map of the development zone currently being targeted by Clark Developments, the company owned by Mr. David Clark." He then picked up a red marker, and this, he said, drawing a thick, bold circle around the exact same area, is the designated primary area of operation for the Seraphina Jefferson Community Trust. The room was utterly silent. The sheer, breathtaking poetic justice of the act was a thing of terrible beauty. As you can see, Your Honor, Mr. Davies concluded, his voice ringing with a quiet triumph, this trust is not a random act of charity. It is a precise, strategic surgical instrument. It is a multi-million-dollar counteroffensive conceived and funded by Serafina Jefferson and specifically designed to protect the very communities that her son-in-law has been systematically attempting to dismantle for profit. Mr. Clark wanted to tear down homes. This trust will renovate them. He wanted to evict families. This trust will defend them. He wanted to buy up a neighborhood for pennies on the dollar. This trust will empower that neighborhood to buy itself. This is not the work of a confused or delusional mind, Your Honor. This is the work of a brilliant, protective, and profoundly righteous mind. This is the final will and testament of a queen defending her kingdom. I looked at David. All the color had drained from his face. This was a blow from which he could never recover. It was a fate worse than bankruptcy. It was a public permanent monument to his own defeat, funded by the very money he had schemed to possess. His own mother-in-law had become his direct business competitor, his ideological nemesis, a ghost, armed with a $7 million war chest dedicated to the complete and utter destruction of his life's work. I looked at my children. They finally understood. Their inheritance hadn't just been taken from them. Their mother, with her last act on earth, had used it to build a wall between her legacy and their greed. And I looked at the map, at the beautiful, perfect, devastating circle my wife had drawn. I saw her hand in it all, her fierce love, her brilliant mind, her unwavering sense of justice. She had not just protected me. She had protected our entire community. She had not left behind a fortune. She had left behind a future. And in that moment, my heart, which had been so broken, swelled with a love and a pride so immense, it felt as if it could fill the entire world. My Serafina. She had planted a garden on their grave indeed. The revelation of the community trust had sucked all the air out of the room. My children and my son-in-law were not just defeated. They were obliterated, their motives and their character laid bare for the court to see. David was a hollowed-out shell, his entire business model and life's ambition dismantled by a ghost. Marcus was staring at the trust document on the easel, as if it were a multi-million-dollar tombstone marking the death of his future. And Naomi was weeping not with the performative grief of the funeral, but with the genuine soul-crushing despair of a woman who had just been forced to see the truth of her own heart. The judge, her face a stern mask of disapproval, looked as if she was about to bring the proceedings to a swift and final end. But Mr. Davies held up a single placating hand. "One final matter, Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet but commanding. "If I may, we have addressed the estate's liquid assets, but we have not yet addressed the issue that was the catalyst for this entire unfortunate affair, the issue of the family home." At the mention of the house, a desperate, irrational flicker of hope appeared in Marcus's eyes. Naomi's sobbing quieted slightly. It was the last piece on the chessboard. The money was gone, yes, but the property, the land, the house itself, that was the prize. That was the asset worth millions. Perhaps there was still something left to salvage from the wreckage. David, however, did not look up. He knew. A man like him, a man who dealt in contracts and loopholes, knew that a mind as meticulous as Serafina's would not have left a single stone unturned. Mr. Davies walked back to the clerk and retrieved another document, the one pertaining to the Jefferson Family Heritage Trust. As the court is aware, he began the home at 172 Willow Creek Lane was placed into an irrevocable trust by Mrs. Jefferson 5 months ago. I would like to read the 2 key clauses of that trust into the record to ensure there is no ambiguity about its purpose or its future. He cleared his throat. First Clause A of the trust grants my client, Mr. Silas Jefferson, exclusive and absolute right to live in and control the property for the remainder of his natural life. No one can evict him, no one can force a sale, and no one can make alterations to the property without his express written consent. His home is and will remain his sanctuary for as long as he lives. This first part was a shield, a legal wall built around me, protecting me from any further attempts to dislodge me. But it was the second clause that was the true masterstroke. It was the final, devastating blow to their greed and the most beautiful tribute to the woman I loved. Mr. Davies paused, letting the finality of the first clause settle in. Then he continued. Secondly, Your Honor, Clause B details the disposition of the property upon my client's passing. It reads as follows. He then read directly from the document, his voice clear and resonant. Upon the death of my husband, Silas Jefferson, the ownership of the house and the surrounding property at 172 Willow Creek Lane shall be transferred in its entirety and as an unrestricted gift to the city of Atlanta. He paused again. I saw Marcus and Naomi exchange a look of utter stunned confusion. Why would their mother give their childhood home to the city? It made no sense. This gift, however, Mr. Davies continued, his voice rising with a quiet, triumphant power, comes with a single legally binding and non-negotiable condition. The city is required to preserve the home and convert it into the Serafina Jefferson Community Arts Center. The trust specifies that it must be a place for the neighborhood's youth to learn music, painting, and sculpture, with a permanent mandate to provide free classes and materials for underprivileged children. The garden my wife tended for 50 years is to be maintained as a public space, a place of peace and beauty for all to enjoy. The house she filled with love is to continue giving love to the community for generations to come. And there it was, the final checkmate. It was a move of such breathtaking generosity and strategic brilliance that it left everyone speechless. The house was the one thing they had all coveted. The cornerstone parcel, David had called it. And now it was forever beyond their reach, destined to become the very antithesis of their vision. Not a private exclusive tower of glass and steel, but a public inclusive haven of creativity and hope. David finally looked up, and his face was a blank mask of utter defeat. He had been beaten at his own game, outmaneuvered by a ghost. Marcus just stared, his mouth slightly agape, the final calculation of his lost inheritance clicking through his mind. But it was Naomi's reaction that I will never forget. She looked around the cold, impersonal courtroom, and then looked at me, her father, and for the first time I saw in her eyes the devastating realization of what she had truly lost. Not just a house, not just money. She had lost her past. Her childhood home, the place that should have been her anchor, was now a symbol of her own moral failure, a legacy she would have no part in. In her quest to seize a piece of her mother's future, she had forfeited her own history. I felt tears streaming down my face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of overwhelming love and pride. This was Serafina's true legacy. She was not just a gardener of roses. She was a gardener of people, of community. The home we had built with our hands, the home we had filled with 50 years of memories, would not be bulldozed for profit. It would live on its rooms, filled with the sound of children's laughter and the spark of creation. It was the most perfect tribute, the most profound victory. It was the final beautiful testament of a love that was strong enough to build a home and a legacy that was generous enough to give it away. Mr. Davies sat down. He had presented every piece of our defense, every detail of Serafina's brilliant posthumous strategy. There was nothing left to say. The story was told. The truth was out. The courtroom was a cathedral of stunned silence, the only sound the quiet, ragged breathing of my daughter. All eyes were on the judge. She had been the audience to this terrible play, and now it was her turn to deliver the final lines. She looked down from her bench, her gaze sweeping over the wreckage at the petitioner's table, before finally settling on me. The look of pity was gone, replaced by one of profound respect. She took a deep breath, and her voice when she spoke was clear, strong, and filled with an authority that was absolute. In the matter of the conservatorship of Silas Jefferson, she began, her words echoing in the silent room. This court has heard extensive testimony. The petitioners have alleged that Mr. Jefferson is of an unsound mind and incapable of managing his own affairs. After reviewing all the evidence presented, this court finds that assertion to be not only baseless, but a malicious and fraudulent perversion of the truth. She looked directly at me. On the contrary, the court finds Mr. Silas Jefferson to be a man of exceptional dignity, clarity, and fortitude. Furthermore, the court finds the meticulous, brilliant, and deeply compassionate estate planning of his late wife, Serafina Jefferson, to be a testament to a mind that was not only sound, but extraordinary. I felt a tear trace a path down my cheek. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated vindication. The judge then turned her icy gaze back to the petitioner's table. The petition for conservatorship is hereby dismissed with prejudice, meaning it can never be refiled. This court does not take lightly the use of its proceedings as a tool for a predatory financial attack. The actions of the petitioners are a gross abuse of the legal system and an insult to the memory of the woman they claim to honor. She wasn't finished. Furthermore, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level based on the evidence of a conspiracy to commit fraud, including the submission of a fraudulent medical report and perjured testimony, this court is referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at David, specifically into the actions of Mr. David Clark and Mr. Mark Fields. The finality of it was a physical blow. David, who had been a hollowed-out ruin, now looked up, his face a mask of pure terror. He had walked in here as a predator, hoping to seize a fortune. He was walking out as a criminal defendant facing the very real possibility of a prison sentence. The judge lifted her gavel. "This court is adjourned," she declared. The sharp, definitive crack of the gavel striking wood was the final note in Serafina's symphony of justice. It was over. We had won. The sound of the judge's gavel was the last sound of the war. What followed was the quiet, grim accounting of the aftermath. I went home that day not to a celebration, but to a profound and heavy silence. The victory was not sweet. It was the bitter, necessary medicine my wife had prescribed. I had won, but I had also lost. I had lost the children I thought I had, the family I thought was mine. In the weeks and months that followed, the consequences of that day in court unfolded not in a dramatic explosion, but in a slow, inevitable collapse, like a building whose foundations had been dynamited. I did not seek out the news. It came to me in pieces delivered by the calm, professional voice of Mr. Davies on the burner phone or the gentle, compassionate tone of Esther May over a cup of tea. Each piece of news was a fresh stone laid on the grave of the family we once were. The first to fall and the hardest was David. His ruin was swift and public. Just 1 week after the hearing, Mr. Davies called. "Silas," he said, his voice devoid of any triumph, "the District Attorney's Office has formally opened a criminal investigation into David Clark and Mark Fields for conspiracy to commit fraud and perjury. It's going to be in the papers tomorrow." And it was. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Serafina and I had shared 50 years of breakfasts, and I read the story in the Atlanta Business Chronicle. The article was brutal. It detailed not only the fraudulent medical report presented in my case, but it also mentioned the damning testimony of his former business partners. The reporter had done his homework, uncovering a pattern of unethical deals and disgruntled investors. My son-in-law was not portrayed as a fallen titan of industry. He was portrayed as a common predator, a man who built his career on the ruin of others. The fallout was immediate. His company, Clark Developments, which had been a house of cards built on a mountain of debt, imploded. His investors, terrified by the scandal and the criminal investigation, pulled out. The banks called in their loans. The grand condominium project, the one for which our home was to be the cornerstone parcel, was dead. Its funding vanished. David went from being the hunter to the hunted, hounded by creditors and reporters. He had come to my home to seize a fortune, and in the process he had lost his own. He was facing not just financial ruin, but the very real possibility of a prison sentence. Marcus's downfall was a quieter affair, but in many ways more complete. There were no sensational headlines about him, just a slow, creeping professional death. The world of finance runs on two things, money and trust, and he had proven he was bankrupt in both. The details of the conservatorship hearing of a son trying to defraud his own father spread like a virus through the tight-knit circles of Atlanta's wealthy elite. No one wanted their money managed by a man who had been so publicly and thoroughly disgraced, a man who had lied so brazenly under oath. Mr. Davies informed me that the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, had opened an inquiry into Marcus's firm, prompted by the evidence of his own financial desperation that had been revealed at the trial. It was the final nail in the coffin of his career. His clients, the wealthy families who had entrusted him with their fortunes, began to leave, first in a trickle and then in a flood. He was forced to sell his firm for pennies on the dollar to a larger competitor just to cover his own massive losses. The beautiful downtown office, the expensive suits, the gold watch, all the trappings of the success he had worshipped were stripped away. He had defined his entire existence by his professional reputation and his net worth. And now he had neither. I imagined him alone in a world devoid of the status he had valued more than family, more than honor, more than his own mother's love. And then there was Naomi. Her fate, in many ways, was the one that brought me the most sorrow. Her collapse was a direct consequence of her husband's. The life of casual luxury that David had provided for her, the The life for which she had been willing to sacrifice her own father evaporated. The sprawling suburban mansion was foreclosed on by the bank. The luxury cars were repossessed. The country club membership was revoked. The foundation of their marriage, which I now understood, was built not on love, but on a shared, ruthless ambition, could not withstand the pressure of failure. The public humiliation, the financial ruin, and the looming criminal charges were a poison that rotted their relationship from the inside out. It was Esther who told me the final news about my daughter. She came over one afternoon, and as we sat on the patio, she gently told me that she had heard through a friend at her church that Naomi had filed for divorce. She had moved out, not into another grand home, but into a small 2-bedroom rented apartment on the less fashionable side of town. She was alone, stripped of the wealth, the status, and the husband for whom she had made her terrible bargain. As I listened to these stories of ruin, I felt no joy. I felt no satisfaction. I felt only a profound and hollow sadness. I would walk through my quiet house looking at the old family photographs on the walls. I would see Marcus as a little boy, his face bright with pride as he showed me a model airplane he had built. I would see Naomi as a teenager, her smile radiant on her prom night. I would look at these images of the happy, innocent children I had raised, and I would try to understand where it had all gone so wrong. Was it something I had done? Was there a weakness in them that I had failed to see, or a strength I had failed to instill? I did not have the answers. All I knew was that Serafina's plan had not been designed to destroy them. It had been designed to stop them from destroying themselves, from destroying our legacy, from destroying the community. Their ultimate ruin was not her creation, nor was it mine. It was a consequence of their own choices, a destination they had been walking toward for years. The day in court had not been their downfall. It had simply been the moment they were finally forced to arrive. And it was a tragedy, a terrible, needless tragedy, that they had to lose everything to finally understand the value of what they had thrown away. Several months passed. The storm of the trial had subsided, leaving behind a strange and quiet landscape. The world that had been shattered was slowly, piece by piece, reassembling itself into a new and unfamiliar shape. The criminal investigation into David was proceeding a slow, grinding process of legal maneuvering that I followed from a distance through Mr. Davies's periodic updates. Marcus and Naomi had vanished from my life, becoming ghosts in a past I was trying to reconcile. My days found a new rhythm, a quiet routine centered on the two things my wife had left me: her garden and her legacy. I spent my mornings with my hands in the earth, tending to her roses, feeling her presence in the warmth of the sun and the scent of the blossoms. My afternoons were often spent with Esther May, reviewing the first proposals and plans for the community trust and the future arts center. We were building something new, something hopeful on the ashes of my old life. I was beginning to find a fragile peace. Then, one evening, the past came knocking. It was a cold, rainy night in late autumn. The sound of the doorbell was a jarring, unwelcome intrusion. I wasn't expecting anyone. My new life was a quiet one, my circle small and trusted. I felt a prickle of apprehension as I walked to the door, the ghosts of the past few months whispering warnings in my ear. I looked through the peephole and my heart stopped. It was them, Marcus and Naomi. They stood huddled together on my porch, shivering under the weak yellow light, looking like two shipwrecked survivors washed up on a hostile shore. David was not with them. For a long moment I did nothing. I just watched them through the distorted glass. They were almost unrecognizable. The arrogant, confident predators from the courtroom were gone, replaced by these two broken, diminished figures. Marcus was not wearing one of his tailored suits. He was in a worn, shapeless coat that looked too big for him. His face was gaunt, his shoulders slumped in a permanent posture of defeat. The fire of his ambition had been extinguished, leaving behind only the cold, gray ash of failure. Naomi looked even worse. The designer clothes, the perfect hair, the air of entitled beauty, it had all been stripped away. She wore a simple, cheap-looking raincoat, her hair plastered to her head by the rain. Her face was thin and pale, etched with new lines of stress and despair. She looked older, tired, and utterly lost. They were no longer a threat. They were just a tragedy. A part of me, the father who had raised them, wanted to keep the door locked, to protect the fragile peace I had so painstakingly built. But another part, a deeper, more ancient instinct, compelled me to open it. I had to face them one last time. I turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open. They looked up startled as if they hadn't truly expected me to answer. We stood there in a profound and heavy silence, the only sound the steady drumming of the rain on the porch roof. They stared at me, their eyes filled with a desperate, unspoken plea. I looked at them, and my heart was a battlefield. A part of me, the father, felt a wrenching, instinctive pity. I saw the ghosts of the children they had been. I saw Marcus, aged 10, his face bright with pride after winning the science fair. I saw Naomi, aged 7, her hand clutching mine as we walked through the park. These memories, which I had tried to bury, rose up, and the sight of their current wretched state was a physical pain in my chest. This was my flesh and blood, my son, my daughter standing before me in ruin. But then I thought of Serafina. I thought of her final letter, of the pain and disappointment in her words. I thought of her courage, her brilliant, fierce love that had reached beyond the grave to protect me, to protect our legacy. I thought of her last request. Fight for us, Silas. To open the door to them now, to let their poison seep back into my life, would be to betray her. It would be to tell her that her sacrifice, her final brilliant battle, was meaningless. I looked closer past their pathetic exteriors and I saw the truth in their eyes. They had not come here for forgiveness. Forgiveness requires repentance, and there was no repentance in their faces. There was only desperation. They had not come to heal a broken relationship. They had come because they were out of money, out of options, out of luck. They had come back to the well they had poisoned, hoping to find a single clean drop of water. They were not here for a father. They were here for a bailout. They had learned nothing. Marcus was the one who finally broke the silence. His voice was a hoarse, unfamiliar croak. "Dad," he said, the single word hanging in the damp air between us. It was not a greeting. It was a plea. Naomi just looked at me, her face streaked with rain and what might have been tears. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. And in that moment, my own internal war was over. The father in me wept for the children I had lost. But the husband, the guardian of Serafina's legacy, knew what he had to do. I could not save them from themselves. To try would be to allow them to drag me down into the wreckage they had created. Serafina had not fought so hard to free me, only for me to walk back into the cage. I did not yell. I did not lecture them. Their shattered lives were a more eloquent sermon than any I could ever deliver. I simply looked at them, my son and my daughter, one last time. I let my gaze hold all the sorrow, all the finality of my decision. It was a look that said, "I will always love the children you once were, but I cannot save the people you have chosen to become." And then with a slow, deliberate movement that felt as heavy as a lifetime of memories, I began to close the door. I saw the flicker of disbelief in their eyes, followed by the dawning final understanding that this was the end. The door swung shut, closing out the sight of their ruined faces, the sound of the rain, and the last vestiges of the life we had once shared. I leaned my forehead against the cool, solid wood of the door, and I turned the deadbolt. The sound of it sliding home was not a sound of anger or of victory. It was a sound of peace, the sound of a final necessary boundary being drawn, the sound of a promise being kept, the sound of a war at long last being over. I was alone in my home, but for the first time in a very long time, I was truly free. The winter that followed was a long, quiet season of healing. The rains came and washed the world clean, and the cold air seemed to crystallize my thoughts, freezing the chaotic emotions of the past year into a hard, clear certainty. The ghosts of my old life, of the children I had lost, slowly receded. They did not vanish entirely. They became a part of my own history, a sad closed chapter in a book I no longer read. My life, which had been a tangled narrative of family and betrayal, was now a single clear story. A story about a man and a promise. A story about building something new on the foundations of a great love. When spring arrived, it felt like a personal resurrection. The first green shoots that pushed their way through the dark, damp earth in Serafina's garden were a reflection of the new life that was beginning to sprout within me. The house, which had been a fortress and then a war room, began to transform again. It was becoming a headquarters, a place of creation. My days found a new rhythm, a new purpose. The living room, where I had once performed my own mental decay, was now a bustling, impromptu office. The heavy formal furniture had been pushed against the walls, replaced by a large drafting table that I had brought out of storage. Blueprints and architectural sketches were spread across its surface, held down at the corners by heavy books and coffee cups. This was where I had started my life as an architect, and now it was where I would finish it. But the plans I was drawing were not for a private client or a corporate tower. They were for the Serafina Jefferson Community Arts Center. Esther May was my constant partner in this new venture. She would come over 3 or 4 times a week, bringing with her a thermos of strong coffee and a sharp, practical mind that cut through any problem. We were an unlikely team. I was the dreamer, the man of vision and design, and she was the pragmatist, the woman of action and community. She was the executor of the community trust, and she took her duty with a profound seriousness. She was the voice of the people Serafina had sought to protect. One bright April morning, we were hunched over the drafting table looking at the preliminary sketches for the Arts Center. "We need more light in the main studio," Silas Esther said, tapping a pencil on the blueprint. "These kids, they need to feel like the sun is on their side. No dark corners for them to get lost in." I smiled. "You're right, Esther. Absolutely right." I began to sketch a new design, a series of large high windows that would face the south, flooding the room with natural light. As I drew, I felt a joy, a pure, clean sense of creation that I hadn't felt in decades. I was not just designing a building. I was designing a future. I was building a sanctuary. Our home was no longer a silent place. It was filled with new sounds. The sound of Esther's hearty laugh, the sound of the phone ringing with calls from contractors, from city planners, from young artists who had heard about the project and wanted to be a part of it. We hired a young, idealistic project manager, a woman named Maya, who had grown up in the very neighborhood we were trying to protect. She was sharp, passionate, and she revered Serafina's vision as if it were scripture. Maya would sit with us for hours, her laptop open, her energy infectious. "Okay," she said one afternoon, her eyes bright with excitement. "I've spoken with 3 more families on Elm Street. The Trust's zero-interest loan program is a godsend for them." Mrs. Henderson cried when I told her we could fund a new roof for her. She was about to sell to one of David Clark's shell companies for a fraction of what her home is worth. Hearing his name no longer sent a jolt of anger through me. He was a ghost from a different life, a defeated enemy whose power was broken. He was a footnote in the real story, the story we were now writing. And the old Franklin building, Maya continued pulling up a photograph of a derelict commercial property. The one David wanted to turn into luxury lofts. The community trust officially closed on the purchase this morning. The residents committee wants to turn the ground floor into a cooperative grocery store. I looked at the picture of the rundown building and I didn't see decay. I saw potential. I saw a place where families could buy fresh food, a place that would be owned by the community it served. I saw Serafina's garden, its seeds of justice spreading throughout the city. Sometimes in the quiet moments I would walk through the house and think of them. I would see Marcus at the kitchen table struggling with his homework. I would see Naomi in the garden making a chain of daisies for her hair. The memories were still there, but they no longer had the power to wound me. They were like faded photographs of a country I could no longer visit. I felt a deep, abiding sorrow for the people they had become, for the happiness they had squandered in their pursuit of an empty prize. But I no longer felt responsible for them. My responsibility was here in this house with these plans, with the promise I had made to my wife. One evening, Esther and I were working late. The room was lit only by the warm glow of the drafting lamp. We were reviewing the final plans for the Arts Center. It was beautiful. More beautiful than I had ever imagined. The old house was the heart of it, preserved and restored, and branching out from it were new modern wings of glass and light that embraced the garden. "She would have loved this," Silas Esther said quietly, her hand resting on the blueprint. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "She would have." I looked out the window into the darkness of the garden, where I knew her roses were sleeping, waiting for the morning sun. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was not the silence of loss. It was the peaceful, expectant silence of a place that is waiting for the children to arrive. A new generation of children. Children who would come here to find a safe haven, to discover their own voices, to create their own beauty. The legacy was no longer just a legal document or a pile of money in a trust. It was becoming a living, breathing thing. It was the dawn of a new day, not just for me, but for the entire community. And in the heart of that new dawn, I could feel Serafina's smile, as bright and as warm as the sun. The sun was setting, painting the Atlanta sky in brilliant strokes of orange and purple. I sat on the patio, a warm cup of tea in my hands, and looked out over the garden. The roses were in full bloom, their velvet petals glowing in the fading light. A year ago, this same scene, this same beautiful sunset would have been a source of unbearable pain, a sharp reminder of all that I had lost. But now, it felt different. The ache was still there, a soft, quiet hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer the only song my heart knew how to sing. It was now the bass note to a new, more hopeful melody. I thought of the man I had been at Serafina's funeral. A man hollowed out by grief, a ghost adrift in the ruins of his own life. I thought of the cold, hard soldier I had become in that courtroom, a man forged in the fires of betrayal. I barely recognized either of them anymore. The man I was today was someone new, someone I was still getting to know. He was a builder again. For so many years, Serafina and I believed our legacy would be our children. We thought we were building a dynasty of love and values that would be passed down through them. We were wrong. Our children were not the vessels for our legacy. They were the test of it. And in the end, the legacy had proven stronger than the bloodline. Our true legacy was not in the people we had created, but in the principles we had lived by. A belief in community, a passion for justice, a deep and abiding love that was strong enough to look beyond its own pain and build something for others. The pain of my children's betrayal was a wound that would never fully heal. But I had learned that a wound does not have to be a source of weakness. Sometimes it can be an opening, a place where the light can get in. The energy I had once spent on a dying family was now being poured into a living, breathing community. The pain had been transformed into purpose. The grief had been alchemized into creation. Every blueprint I drew for the Arts Center, every family we helped with the trust was a defiance of the darkness that had threatened to consume me. It was my way of telling the world and myself that love is a more powerful architect than greed. I found a new kind of peace in this work. It was not the quiet, gentle peace of retirement I had once envisioned. It was an active, vibrant peace, a peace that came from a tired body at the end of a long, productive day. It was the peace of knowing you are a part of something larger than yourself. I was no longer just the guardian of Serafina's memory. I was the builder of her vision. And in doing so, I had found a new purpose for my own life. I was not just living out my final years. I was planting a garden that would bloom long after I was gone. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. A full year has passed since the day in court. The seasons have turned, and with them the pages of my own life have turned to a new and final chapter. I am sitting in my study, the same room where I once sat in the dark, clutching a secret key, a man preparing for war. But the room is different now. The air is not thick with secrets and suspicion, but with the scent of fresh sawdust and the warm afternoon sun. Through the open window I can hear the sounds of construction, the rhythmic beat of hammers and the shouts of workers, the sound of a promise being kept, the sound of Serafina's legacy rising from the ground. I have been writing this story down here in this old, leather-bound journal, not as an indictment, not to place blame or to relish in the downfall of my children. I am writing to understand, to bear witness to the strange and painful journey that brought me from the deepest grief to this quiet, sunlit peace. I see now that what happened was not just a family drama. It was a profound and terrible lesson on the nature of value. My children had learned to calculate the price of everything, but they had forgotten the value of anything. They saw a house and saw a property. They saw their inheritance and saw a lifeline. They saw their parents, and they saw a resource to be depleted. Their greed was a sickness of the soul, and it led them to their own ruin. I do not feel anger for them anymore, only a deep and abiding sorrow for the richness they threw away in their pursuit of wealth. This whole journey, I realize now, has been my final conversation with my wife. Every step of her plan that I executed, every lie I told to ensnare the deceitful, every truth I revealed to the court was a sentence in that conversation. She was with me in every decision, her wisdom, my guide, her love, my shield. She taught me even in her absence that a legacy is not something you leave to people. It is something you build for them. It is not an inheritance of money, but an inheritance of principle. I did not seek this fight. I was a man ready for the quiet end of his days. But I was called to one last battle, not for myself, but for the honor of the woman I loved. And in that fight, I found a strength I never knew I possessed. It was not the strength of a young man, but the quiet, unyielding strength of a foundation that has weathered a lifetime of storms. The justice that was served was not revenge. Revenge is a hot and selfish fire. What Serafina planned and what I helped to build was a rebalancing. It was the restoration of order. It was a final defiant declaration that love is a better architect than greed. I learned that grief is not the end of a conversation. Sometimes it is the beginning of a deeper understanding. Serafina taught me that a true legacy is not what you leave for people, but what you leave inside of them. Greed can build empires of glass that glitter in the sun, but they shatter into dust at the first touch of truth. Real strength isn't found in clinging to what you own, but in having the courage to let it go, to build something far greater, something that will shelter and nurture those who come long after you are gone. What do you think of Serafina's final, brilliant act of justice? I would love to read your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Thank you for being here and for listening.